This week, we're examining other stories, deliberate forgeries that have taken on a life of their own, contributing much confusion within what is known as the truth movement. Many such rumors are iconic, and good people have invested much energy promoting these legends. But legends they are. In some cases, well-meaning folks thought that by putting those frauds into circulation, they were helping impart greater truths that people need to know. Well, there are some of us who believe we already have enough facts at our disposal to make the important points that need to be made. We don't need to invent stories to make our case. Other stories had less than benevolent motivations behind them. They were concocted for the very purpose of muddying the waters of serious research into major issues of our time. Now, I am really going to upset some people by mentioning some of the notable forgeries. I'm going to go through a list of them with you, and a lot of them, many of you are familiar with, and I'd be willing to bet you, one of my favorite guns, or one of my favorite sword canes, or one of my favorite daggers, that the likelihood is that some of you out there have passed on some of these forgeries, these fraudulent stories that have become commonly discussed and written about and quoted in the patriot media, in the independent media, in the white separatist media, whatever you want to call it. Now, a lot of these stories, as I say, they sound good. They sound good and they meet with the approval of many, but the stories themselves just aren't true. Well, I'm here to tell you, unfortunately, that I personally know one of the people who is responsible, according to some pretty good information that's come to my attention. I know one of the individuals who was responsible for initiating two of these fraudulent stories. And evidently, from what I'm told, he once told somebody else that yes, indeed, he had created these stories because he thought they would be good to get a message across. Well, I don't think that's true, folks, as I say. I don't think that's true. But I'm going to start off with the least interesting one, but it's one that's always around. We constantly hear an excerpt from a speech by David Rockefeller thanking the media for withholding news reports on Bilderberg meetings. Now, yes, folks, yes, the media does withhold news reports on Bilderberg. That's absolutely true. The Spotlight and now American Free Press have covered Bilderberg for years and have frequently commented on that, but I'm here to tell you that never once did Jim Tucker or any responsible person that I know of who did any effort to investigate Bilderberg ever come out of a Bilderberg meeting with a quote from David Rockefeller thanking the media for withholding news reports on Bilderberg. But somebody crafted up some little speech by David Rockefeller, not even a whole speech, just that one quote, and put it out there. And I'm here to tell you, folks, when somebody wrote an article mentioning Bilderberg for American Free Press a few years ago, guess what? That quotation popped up in the story. Usually I would stand up and say, oh, take that quote out of there. That's a phony. That's a fraud. That makes us look foolish. But I didn't want to hurt the author's feelings. And I didn't feel like arguing the point. So it ran. But that doesn't really matter, I suppose, because, well, that quote's all over the Internet. Who conjured up that quote? They sure came up with a good one. They must be sitting back laughing when they see that quote popping up. Okay, some more notable forgeries that have taken on a life of their own and which people swear by. Oh, this is going to upset you folks. The spurious interview with Harold Wallace Rosenthal, in which he supposedly unveils insider secrets of the Zionist conspiracy. That's a fraud, folks. That's a fraud. Total concoction. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a Zionist conspiracy and that the Zionists don't do the kind of things he says that they do. Oh, yes, they do, folks. But that interview is a fraud, folks. The supposedly secret speech by Rabbi Emanuel Rabinovich in Budapest in 1952. Fraud. I know the guy that made it up. In fact, he admitted to somebody else I know that he made it up. He admitted this to the late H. Keith Thompson. Not that H. Keith Thompson is the guy who made it up, but he admitted it to H. Keith Thompson, who was also a friend of mine. Here's another one that Henry Makow has quoted this one frequently, the long-hailed Red Symphony book attributed to Joseph Landowski, purportedly recounting the interrogation of a Soviet official named Rakovsky. Well, now, again, some of the details in that may be correct. And there was somebody named Rakovsky. And he made statements at various times that jibe with what appears in the book. But that interrogation, that was made up, folks. It was the guy who made it up was the late George Knupfer, Knupfer. And from what I've heard, he was a good fellow. I knew people that knew him, but he made that up. Here's another one that was made up, and it's been widely quoted. A racial program for the 20th century was supposedly penned by Israel Cohen. Well, yes, folks, there's no doubt about it that the Jews have tried to cause racial disunity in America. But the famous essay, A Racial Program for the 20th Century, was a fraud. And then here's another one. Freemason Albert Pike's assertion that 3 world wars were planned in advance. Well, Albert Pike was a Freemason, and he was a troublemaker, and he was a bad, bad man. And Freemasons do help create wars and revolutions. And while that theme may well be true, that 3 world wars were planned in advance, the Pike quotation is a fraud. And here's a more recent one, a much-heralded report supposedly approved by U.S. intelligence agencies predicting the demise of Israel. Well, you know, that whole scenario for the demise of Israel essentially is what I wrote about in my book, Confessions of an Anti-Semite. 10-point dissection of that possibility. But somebody took the same theme, the same idea, not necessarily from my book, but they put it out there, and a lot of people I know thought that that report was for real, folks, but it wasn't. It wasn't. Now, there are other methods of spreading falsehood, disguised by others sometimes clever but sinister means. An increasingly popular scenario for inserting disinformation into popular discourse has been the discovery of hidden diaries and other documents that are described as the musings of dead Nazis or dead CIA officers or dead international bankers. However, the careful examination of these documents, if you know what you're looking for, it'll reveal that they are fictions based on carefully crafted interweaving of a variety of previously published material freely accessible in other literature. In other words, these people are really clever writers who have managed to assimilate a lot of information into their own minds, and then they weave them into really interesting stories, but they just ain't true. In other cases, you'll find very real news stories or existing documents that have been altered or otherwise misrepresented as to their meaning. For example, a couple years ago, I went through this right here on RBN. There was one innocuous media report about the corrupt Goldman Sachs banking empire. Well, an internet rumor monger slightly amended that media story from the mainstream media. They amended that story to include the claim that the purported losses at Goldman Sachs had been channeled to secret bank accounts in Israel. Folks, I have no brief, as you well know if you're a regular listener, I have no brief for the international bankers of any kind, whether they're Jewish international bankers, most of which international bankers are indeed Jewish, whether they're Jews or Gentiles, whatever. And I have no brief for the state of Israel, the gangster state of Israel. And it's entirely believable that Goldman Sachs stole investors' money, stole bank money, and channeled it to bank accounts in Israel. I absolutely believe that's entirely possible, folks. But the relevant part of the story that was so widely discussed and that people called in here to talk about was a fabrication. It was inserted into a real, quote-unquote, real news story from the Internet, so that didn't have that originally, but it was repeated. The story with the insertion was repeated everywhere, and people were picking up on it. And I remember one of our callers called in and said, well, Mike, don't you understand that that's really what happened, and that's what's important? No, what I understand is we need to deal with the facts. We don't need to create rumors. We don't need to create fanciful stories that sound good, because sometimes we get caught. And I don't mean we in the royal sense, because I don't fabricate. Stay tuned, folks. Next story I'm going to talk about is going to upset many, 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 many people in the audience. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Hitting some people with some hard facts. Truth. Real truth, folks. Not rumors, not misinformation, not disinformation. Here's the one that's really going to upset a lot of people, of the frauds that have been out there floating around for years. The legendary executive order by John F. Kennedy creating U.S. notes that was supposedly reversed after JFK's assassination by Lyndon Johnson. Well, folks, there was an executive order. It had nothing to do with U.S. notes. A few fanciful people have tried to stretch, when confronted with the facts, few fanciful people have tried to stretch it and say, well, yes, in fact, it really was going against the Federal Reserve. But no, folks, let me tell you in a nutshell here what the story on this is. And unfortunately, I'm sorry to tell you, the spotlight played a major role in getting this false story out there. Sorry to tell you that. We had a credulous lad on the staff, not the one I referred to all the time here in this program. Credulous lad who inserted a small, brief item into what we call the news mist page. If you're familiar with American Free Press, it's just little news items about 2 inches in length, just little brief items. Well, some newsletter promoter somewhere had a newsletter out claiming that John F. Kennedy had put out an executive order issuing U.S. notes into the economy, and that Lyndon Johnson reversed it immediately after Kennedy's assassination. Well, this credulous lad on the Spotlight staff put that in the news mist column. Well, Willis Carto, the publisher, said, I want some facts on this. After it had been published, he said, I'd like to see the facts on this. And he put the guy who in charge of the research department into looking into it, and he discovered that, in fact, that executive order had nothing whatsoever to do with U.S. notes. Further research into the matter discovered that, in fact, there was a general policy that had been enacted into law by Congress going back to like the 1880s or something like that, saying that every few years the Congress and the Treasury that they were required to put U.S. notes into circulation. So this would have happened, whoever would have been president. It happened all the time. Okay. Well, we published a correction the next issue of the Spotlight and published the accurate details. And believe me, it upset a lot of people. People said, oh, no, that can't be true. It has to be true that Kennedy was assassinated because Kennedy was assassinated by the Federal Reserve because of this issue. Well, I'll tell you what happened, folks. Jim Marrs, and don't confuse him with Tex Mars. Jim Marrs wrote his book Crossfire, and in his book Crossfire about the Kennedy assassination, which became a major bestseller, and it's an interesting book, a lot of interesting material in it. In that book, he cited the story about the Federal Reserve and the U.S. note and gave it widespread circulation. And guess what? If you look in that book, you'll see he cited the article in the Spotlight that we had to correct the next week. Oh, boy. Well, subsequent to that, I've written about that, and I wrote about it in the Spotlight, and got angry letters from people who said, oh, it had to be true. But no, folks, it's not true. And there have been other independent people who've looked into it, and these are not agents of the Federal Reserve, folks, no. In fact, a friend of mine, here's what makes it all the more interesting, folks. There were U.S. notes inserted into the U.S. economy during the administration of Lyndon Johnson. In fact, in one of the later editions of my book, Final Judgment, I actually reproduced one of those U.S. notes, and this U.S. note has been in the possession of a friend of mine who is a very big critic of the Federal Reserve, who's a very strong believer in U.S. notes. It's been in his possession for years and years and years. It's in almost mint condition. And you know, it's funny. People said, oh, that had to be a fraud. That couldn't have been real, that it must have been some sort of counterfeit bill, that everybody knows that the U.S. notes were withdrawn from the economy by Lyndon Johnson. Quite the opposite, folks. Quite the opposite. And in fact, if you check on the internet right now, you probably find through currency dealers that you can buy very legitimate U.S. notes from the Lyndon Johnson era. Now, again, folks, this doesn't mean that the Kennedy family was not moving against the Federal Reserve. My late friend, DeWest Hooker, met with Joseph P. Kennedy in Palm Beach in the mid-1950s, introduced by the late, great Lawrence Dennis. The late, great Lawrence Dennis introduced them. And Joe Kennedy, the father of President Kennedy, and my friend DeWest Hooker played golf and then sat down for some serious political talk. I've talked about some of that discussion they had here. But among the things that Joe Kennedy said the Kennedy family intended to do was to break the back of the Jewish moneyed elite, the Rothschilds, once they got in the White House. That is, once John F. Kennedy got in the White House. And they were going to move against the Federal Reserve when it was possible. But JFK did not issue that executive order. And please, I know a lot of you are very upset about that right now. Don't call in here to tell me that he did, because he didn't. And no, I'm not covering up for the Federal Reserve, folks. I'm not covering up for the Federal Reserve. It goes on and on and on. It goes on and on and on. And now, I probably should mention another one of the myths that's out there. It's very, very interesting. This was actually published at Salon.com, which is a liberal pro-gun control site. They have published on January 11th an article entitled The Hitler Gun Control Lie. And they talk about the famous quote that Hitler supposedly said, "This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future." You know what, folks? I first saw that quote back in the 1970s when I was in high school. Somebody wrote a letter to my local daily newspaper in Pennsylvania, a critic of gun control, and they quoted that Hitler quote, which this goes back to the 1970s, folks, which Hitler never said. And would you believe a kid in my high school saw that quotation in the paper and actually picked it up and broadcast it on the daily school broadcast? It was never true. The guy quoted here in this story says, this quotation, often seen without any date or citation at all, suffers from several credibility problems, the most significant of which is that the date often given, 1935, has no correlation with any legislative effort by the Nazis for gun registration, nor would there have been any need for the Nazis to pass such a law, since gun registration laws passed by the Weimar government were already in effect. However, this has not stopped critics of gun control from claiming that Hitler introduced gun control legislation, which he did not. This article points out here, the Weimar Republic, the German government that immediately preceded Hitler's, actually had tougher gun laws than the Nazi regime. In 1928, the Reichstag relaxed the regulation a bit, but put in place a strict registration regime that required citizens to acquire separate permits to own guns, sell them, or carry them. However, now listen to this, folks. Now, Wayne LaPierre of the NRA has put out this phony story about the Hitler gun control legislation. However, according to this writer here, and I've heard this from other sources, folks, the 1938 law signed by Hitler that LaPierre mentioned in his book does the opposite of what he says it did. Here's a quote from the author, Mr. Bernard Harcourt of the University of Chicago. He says, the 1938 revisions completely deregulated the acquisition and transfer of rifles and shotguns, as well as ammunition. Apparently, then, it goes on to say, meanwhile, many more categories of people, including Nazi party members, were exempted from gun ownership regulations altogether, while the legal age of purchase was lowered from 20 to 18, and permit lengths were extended from 1 year to 3 years. Folks, in the past, I have read a letter to the editor of the Spotlight, or a letter to the editor of American Free Press from an American veteran. Nice fellow. In fact, his wife's maiden name was Piper. He was in Germany as an American soldier at the end of the war, and he had great familiarity with the fact that German citizens did have firearms. He discussed it freely with people. So this story that's told by, well, Alex Jones, we heard him ranting and raving the other day. Oh, it's Piers Morgan. Oh, what an embarrassment. Maybe talk about that later. Maybe we shouldn't talk about that later. But again, this story that Hitler banned firearms and his famous quote, not true. A lot of stuff you hear about Mr. Hitler isn't true. This is one of those shows where I guarantee you I make enemies by just forcing people to know the truth. Terrible job. It's a terrible, terrible job. You know, I could do like Alex Jones and play to the crowd like that foolish behavior he displayed on Piers Morgan the other day. He didn't win any converts. He may have won a few converts. I won't go into that, folks. But no, the truth is important to me, folks. And I think it should be important to you. But as we've demonstrated here, it's not necessarily important to a lot of people. And there's a lot of people who, for reasons which are inexplicable to me, people refuse to accept the truth, even when hit over the head with it. So this show is kind of like a concentration camp. We're all concentrated here right now together, and I'm forcing you to concentrate. Those of you who need to concentrate.
Michael Collins Piper, assistant editor of the publication The Spotlight. This is the front page of this week's issue of The Spotlight. Going through the headlines, mobsters rip off workers, pension welfare benefits regularly skimmed. That's an exclusive to The Spotlight. Over on the other side, the lead Mideast nuclear scenario, exclusive to The Spotlight. In the center, the inside story, running through some of the little excerpts. Churches fund atrocities. If your church belongs to the World Council of Churches, then your contributions are being used to fund communist atrocities against blacks in South Africa. That's on the inside, page 5. Another one, Lieutenant Colonel James Bo Gritz is under considerable pressure to forget what he knows about U.S. involvement in international drug trafficking, but he won't shut up. Details on page 12. Michael Collins Piper, what is The Spotlight?
Well, The Spotlight's a weekly publication. It's published by Liberty Lobby, which is celebrating its 32nd anniversary. We call ourselves a populist newspaper. I think the headlines that you read here reflected exactly where we're coming from. A lot of people generally think of us as a conservative newspaper, but as I say, we don't call ourselves that. I don't think you'll find many conservative newspapers taking up for the rights of workers versus the corrupt union leaders and others, and corporate bosses too, who are exploiting the workers in their industries. Our basic position, we favor restrictive tariffs to protect American jobs and industry. We favor restrictive immigration laws to protect American workers. We favor an America First foreign policy. We are in favor of strong national defense, but at the same time, we don't believe that our national defense industry should be exploited by big international banks and multinational corporations who do make a quick buck by foisting off contracts on the government. And I think the WedTech scandal involving Attorney General Edwin Meese kind of illustrates that very well. As I say, we call ourselves a populist newspaper, and we look out for the interests of the little guy versus the interests of the big interests.
And that's what populism means?
That's what populism is, power to the people. Very simple. It's very basic, and conservatives are not populists, and populists are not conservatives, and that's something that a lot of people don't understand. And that's why we don't call ourselves a conservative newspaper.
Published by the Liberty Lobby.
Liberty Lobby.
What is the Liberty Lobby?
Liberty Lobby is the nation's oldest populist institution in Washington, D.C. It's 32 years old this year, just had its 7th National Board of Policy Convention. The Board of Policy of Liberty Lobby is composed of about 25,000 dues-paying members. The readership of the Spotlight itself is approximately, paid circulation is about 200,000. We estimate we have 1 million weekly readers. And Liberty Lobby basically is reflected, the policies of Liberty Lobby are reflected in the Spotlight.
What about your staff? How many reporters?
On the staff itself, I guess we probably have about 6 in-house on the staff, and then we have quite a few outside writers and investigative reporters. We have international bureaus. We have people in Europe, Asia, elsewhere. It's pretty widespread.
We're going to ask our viewers to join us in just a couple of minutes to talk about the publication Spotlight, to give you a chance to become familiar with it.
Okay.
Let me go backwards a little bit to a former September 14th issue, just to focus on one of the inside stories. It's about, well, I'm going to have to open it up a little bit here. I can do that. Well, I'm going to do this. Awkward to do it. Okay, here we go. Spotlight stayed far ahead of establishment on key issues, and we'll focus in on the, I guess it's the right side here, and look at some of the stories that the Spotlight stayed ahead on. Falklands War predicted 2 years in advance, and here's a picture of the headline here. Going down, U.S. government role in global drug racket, media blacks out drug story, and another example, the next one. Jimmy Carter's cocaine connection, and here's the headline here, Carter's cocaine connection. What is it that makes the Spotlight able to do this?
That's very simple. We're not afraid of offending people. The major newspapers and the major networks rely upon advertising to keep them going. The Spotlight does not rely upon that. If you're going to offend one of the major interests who advertises in your network or in your newspaper by publishing a story that offends them, you simply won't publish it. And that's a fact of life, and I would suggest that any of your listeners who would like to challenge me in it, I would suggest if they come up with a story which might offend one of the major advertisers in one of their local newspapers, if they try to get that story published in that newspaper, it will not be published. I've experienced that in my own hometown newspaper. They simply will not publish anything which is contrary to the special interests which dictate the news in the publications in question. And that's why the Spotlight publishes what it believes and what we believe to be the truth.
And that's what makes this publication unique and different from
and
what you published out
And I
in the
sincerely
press.
believe that. I believe the Spotlight is unique. I sincerely believe that, otherwise I wouldn't be working for the Spotlight. Many of my friends always tell me that I should work for a, quote, real newspaper, unquote. Well, I think the Spotlight is a real newspaper because it doesn't rely upon the special interest to dictate what should be in the pages of the paper.
Mm-hmm. We are talking in this next 45-minute segment this morning with Michael Collins Piper, who is the assistant editor of the Spotlight and has been with the Spotlight for almost 8 years, and has been assistant editor since 1982. And you also cover politics, is that right?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Why unfortunately?
Well, because I have become convinced in the last few years in watching it. And I've always been interested in politics, I guess, since I've been very small, but I didn't realize until the last few years how absolutely corrupt it is. And I think if you look into it, and I mean this very sincerely, if you look into it, I don't think you'll find anybody on Capitol Hill who is completely honest in the conventional sense, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I think if you look behind the scenes, you'll find rampant corruption in every Capitol Hill office. I think you'll find it in every state legislative office. I think you'll find it anywhere you look in politics.
Would you be willing to give us an example?
Well, I think a very good example is one of the stories we pointed out in the Spotlight, in which I'm very proud to have done myself. That involves the suicide of Bud Dwyer, the Pennsylvania state treasurer.
Oh, yeah.
Bud Dwyer went on television and shot himself. And the way it was reported, it was very sensational. The Washington Post, which is supposedly one of the premier newspapers of the country, focused on the circumstances of Bud Dwyer's death, publishing these sensational photos of him placing the gun in his mouth and the aftermath of it. Well, the thing is, the reports that the Washington Post had, they said that Dwyer read a, quote, rambling statement, unquote, before his death. Well, if you read Bud Dwyer's statement, you'll see that there was absolutely nothing rambling about it. Bud Dwyer's final statement, it was 22 pages long, was a fierce indictment of the Justice Department. It was a fierce indictment of former Pennsylvania Governor Dick Thornburgh, who now has presidential ambitions. It was a case study of an absolute railroad job engineered by certain forces in the Justice Department in collaboration with certain elements in the Republican Party in Pennsylvania. I am absolutely convinced that Bud Dwyer was not guilty of the crime of which he was convicted. I'm convinced that he was set up, and I'm convinced that the Justice Department has done all in its power to cover up its role in that. And this is a very, very striking case which received national headlines. But the real story was not told. And I think that's an outrage to Bud Dwyer, to his memory, and to his family, particularly because of the fact that he chose to commit suicide in the fashion that he did simply so that he could bring attention to his case. He figured, I guess, in a sense, that the media would be forced by the circumstances of his death to focus on why he killed himself, but the media did not do that. And that's why the Spotlight exists, to bring the other side of the story. And that answers two questions to you. Number one, a good case of political corruption. In this case, a man who was not corrupt and yet who was victimized by a very corrupt system. And number two, why the Spotlight exists, to tell the other side of the story.
We're talking about the publication Spotlight. We're talking about what makes it unique, what its editorial policy is, what its purpose is, who reads it, and how it covers some of the major stories of the day. We'll take your calls in just a couple of minutes. But first, we're going to take a little segment of a call-in program from last week. We had Jefferson Morley of The Nation on.
Oh, yes, I'd like to hear this.
All right, we'll go to that and then get your response.
Okay, very good.
I've seen many repeat journalists on your show, and there seems to be a blatant avoidance of journalists from a leading national opinion-making news weekly, and that's the Spotlight. Now, I realize you had their editor, Vincent Ryan, on once about a year ago, but that is obviously not sufficient if you want to be fair and impartial to your viewers. Now, why don't you have journalists on from the Spotlight? Trish Katzen and Michael Collins Piper, they would be excellent guests. They're young. They have excellent academic credentials. I think they're pretty mainstream, and I'm sure it will render a valuable service to your viewers.
I will answer you the same way I answered the last gentleman. I think you're probably right. And what we have to do is keep looking for the opportunities to get people from all the different sides and representing different points of view. I noticed you reacted to the Spotlight And I heard sounds coming out of your mouth. Why did you do that?
Well, the reason the spotlight isn't on is because it's a publication with a long history of ugly anti-Semitism, and people should think very carefully about whether that has a place in the public discourse. I think that everybody's entitled to their view. I think those people should be on here so that when people across the country do see this crackpot extremism, anti-Semitism, right-wing craziness, they can see it for what it's worth and judge accordingly.
Mr. Piper, your reaction?
Well, that sounds like name-calling to me. I doubt if we'll bring a libel suit against them, although we have been fairly successful in fending off libel suits ourselves. And I would have to say this much. This gentleman represents the nation, which is many people would call a crackpot publication itself. It has a long history of left-wing extremism, and I kind of find it very amusing that Mr. Morley would come off and call us anti-Semitic, considering the fact that Norman Podhoretz, who is the editor, I believe he's the editor of Commentary, which is published by the New York chapter of the American Jewish Committee. Mr. Podhoretz recently wrote an article in Commentary in which he noted the fact that a recent article by Gore Vidal, which was published in The Nation, constituted, I think in his words, the most blatant case of anti-Semitism that he had seen in any publication in recent history. Now, let me qualify this by saying that I don't believe that what Gore Vidal published in The Nation was anti-Semitic. It was simply critical of Israel. And this happens to be the case, that anybody who is critical of Israel is called anti-Semitic. Well, that's absolute nonsense. The Spotlight is not anti-Semitic. Mr. Morley can get his political mileage out of calling us anti-Semitic. It's absolutely not true. We have Jewish writers on our staff. Our attorney, Mark Lane, who is now defending us in court, or I should say he's handling a number of libel suits we have filed against people who have called us anti-Semitic. Mr. Lane himself is Jewish. He happens to be critical of the state of Israel. To be critical of Israel is not anti-Semitism, and anybody who believes that is a crackpot, like Mr. Morley.
All right, let's go to the phones this morning. Mount Holly, New Jersey. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Trying to get in touch with the president pertaining concerning the board confirmation. I will read just part of what I'm trying to convey. President Reagan's appointment of Judge Robert Ford to the Supreme Court. It's so obvious that the Democrats have made a mockery of the Constitution itself because their resentment toward this president. It is ironic, first of all, Senators Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden considered Judge Ford. One is a liar, and the other, the death of a life, is still in question. If the people of America can actually get through this in kangaroo court, when watching the rights, the rights, the birds, the dogs, the deputies, taking the wall, I think this nation is doomed and will fall within, as the Roman Empire did in 300 years.
Okay, Mount Holly, thank you. Let's leave it at that.
Okay, we had a very bad connection there,
Yeah.
but I gather the caller was favorably inclined towards Judge Bork.
Yes.
I think it would be fair to say that the Spotlight is very favorably inclined towards Judge Bork. We do have some disagreements with him, particularly his view on freedom of speech. And this might sound unusual coming from a newspaper, but we have this feeling that Judge Bork, in his rulings and in his public statements, has basically endorsed a license to lie on the part of the media. Now, the Spotlight does not believe in lying. That's why we've never really lost a libel suit. we are ready to defend whatever we have to say in court. Unfortunately, however, the establishment media in this country, and I refer to the respectable quote-unquote newspapers and television broadcasting, radio broadcasting networks, tend to think they can say anything they want about anybody, anytime, and get away with it. And as I say, a good example is what we heard here from this gentleman from The Nation coming on here and saying things that are just absolutely not true, things that are false, malicious, and defamatory. And we don't think that that's very good. And unfortunately, Judge Bork would probably be inclined to let somebody like this go ahead and say whatever they want. Otherwise, Judge Bork has taken positions on a broad range of issues that we tend to think are congruent with the thinking of most of the American people. And I think it would be unfortunate to see Judge Bork rejected for the Supreme Court, considering who his enemies are.
How has the Spotlight covered the story?
We have simply had just various news notes about it, and I think we had one major commentary on it, and in which we reflected upon those feelings that I just expressed. We have not focused a great deal on it because the Spotlight tries to focus on the other side of the news, and we also try to focus on things that are not being covered in the major media. And obviously the Bork nomination has been. So.
Alameda, California, good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. I've got a comment and a question for you. I found it interesting that you mentioned the reluctance of major media to be critical of its advertisers. Recently, I submitted a letter to the editor to the San Francisco Chronicle and noticed that it wasn't printed. The letter concerned Macy's, which is one of their biggest advertisers, running quite a bit of advertising for Toshiba products. And, of course, Toshiba recently was caught selling military secrets to the Soviet Union. They were running some advertising, a lot of advertisements for Toshiba and calling them major name products, omitting their name. So I wrote a letter to the Chronicle mentioning that fact, and it was not printed. Of course, I've had a couple of others that were printed that didn't mention one of their advertisers. My question is, where can I find the Spotlight?
Okay, well, you can write the Spotlight at 300 Independence Avenue Southeast, Washington, D.C., 20003. It's 300 Independence Avenue Southeast, Washington, D.C., 20003. And our subscription rate is $30 per year, and that means 52 issues, including a combined issue at the beginning of the year. And I think it's probably one of the better media bargains you'll get.
And the address is on the screen also.
And okay, very good.
Augusta,
okay.
Georgia, good morning.
I used to live in Miami, Florida, and when that congressman wrote that book, They Dare to Speak Out, that Congressman Paul Finley,
right.
The bookstores, Bookland, all them bookstores boycotted that book. And the reason I know is because a man at one of the big bookstores at Bookland at Gordo Jamal, he told me that he had 700 and some of them books on order from people calling in. He couldn't order that book for me, he said, because there were some powerful people in South Florida that wasn't going to allow it. And I'm going to tell you one thing, when a congressman state can't write a book critical of Israel, and we don't have no freedom of speech in the United States, and they can write anything they want to about the Christians, about Jesse Jackson, anybody else, but honey, you can't write a word about them people. If you write anything about them, you're in trouble from the word go. And I just want to tell that man, there ain't no freedom of speech in this country to criticize Israel. And I'm not against the Jewish people, because I know some fine Jewish people. But I think that the United States, the people in this country, have a right to criticize any country in the world, especially when that country, you know, don't take a homeland away from people and don't give them no place to live. And that's the one thing upset me about them. Otherwise, I ain't got nothing against them Jewish people except that they don't want other people to have freedom of speech, but they can say anything on the TV about anybody they want to.
All right, Augusta, thank you.
Okay, I would just comment the book that the lady was referring to, They Dare to Speak Out, was written by Congressman Paul Findley, who was basically a moderate Republican congressman. He was no right-wing reactionary. He was no right-wing bigot, no anti-Semite. Just a mainline, moderate, actually even a liberal Republican who had the audacity to question some of our foreign policy stands in the Middle East, and he actually suggested that perhaps the Palestinians had a right to a homeland, and for that reason, I would hate to hazard a guess as to how much money was sent into his district from outside the state of Illinois, but it would be safe to say hundreds of thousands of dollars was pumped into his district, hundreds of thousands of dollars were pumped into his district to defeat him for re-election simply on the basis that he had criticized the state of Israel, or at least he had taken a position that the defenders of Israel considered to be hazardous to the state of Israel's health. And I think that really says something, because I doubt if most of the people in Congressman Findley's district cared one way or the other about how he stood on the question of Israel. And what this lady just suggested is that that has become such a sensitive topic that anybody who is critical of Israel, and that includes myself or the Spotlight in general, is subject to being accused of anti-Semitism, neo-Nazism, what have you. And that's nonsense. That's absolute nonsense.
Albuquerque, New Mexico. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
I'm very happy to hear about the Spotlight, and I want to make a suggestion that in a few months, all the candidates will be coming up to say that they are immune to the interests of the special interests, and that they are going to vote for the people. Everyone says that. But here we have, just an hour ago on C-SPAN, Senator Byrd of West Virginia saying that he is against the approval of Judge Bork because of all the furor it is caused by the special interests, and so he's going to vote against him because the special interests are predominant. Then the other thing about the Bork amendment that distresses me is that the first poll about Judge Bork disclosed that 57 people didn't recognize the name and had never heard of him. So all of these majorities are coming up with majorities of the remaining 47%. And these are the things that I think Spotlight could undertake, because these are such obvious anomalies in the history of our legislators.
All right, Albuquerque, thank you.
I think what he had to say was very significant. Unfortunately, I find that even many people who read the Spotlight, I find this on occasion, many people who read the Spotlight, many of my friends who have gone through college, I've had friends who I went to law school with, can't even name their own congressman. They can't even name the senators from their own states. Most of the American people, unfortunately, do not read the Spotlight, and secondly, most of the American people are not really concerned with some of these big issues that really do affect them directly. So I think what he said about ignorance and lack of awareness on the part of people is very significant.
Raytown, Missouri. Good morning.
Good morning. First, I'd just like to commend C-SPAN. I think you're improving your guest list. I like that. I like the gentleman you have on this morning, and I would like to commend you also for the ones you had on yesterday morning, and the reporters. I believe it was Mr. Curry and Mr. Wade. I enjoyed that program. They seem to be sensible people. But getting back to the other medias, I live by, and take the Kansas City Star here from Kansas City, Missouri, and I tried to be critical in a letter on a local subject here, and it involved an advertiser with this paper, and they wouldn't only print my letter to them, but I tried to pay for the entire letter, and they wouldn't accept it that way either. So just keep it up, C-SPAN, and you too, Mr. Piper.
All right, thank you.
Well, I feel like I struck a chord out there. We've gotten 2 calls now from people who prior to my challenge to the listeners of C-SPAN who had already written letters to the editor of their local paper and found them rejected because they were critical of advertisers, and I think that proves my point beyond question.
Riverside, California is next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm fascinated by your paper, which I'd never heard of. I wonder if you intend to, or maybe you already have, write anything on this, bringing in the 50,000 Chinese people. I think it's a bizarre idea. They're subsidizing sweatshops and agriculture, no health benefits, which means that we end up paying their benefits. We're not going to let them go without anything. I don't understand why they keep doing this. It seems to me that agriculture and these sweatshops either have to come up with a better idea or just go under. I don't understand why the American people have to, and also they keep bringing in just people of color. If they want to bring in 50,000, why don't they go to Ireland or something? I'll hang up and listen to your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
In fact, we have already done an item on that in the Spotlight. She's referring to the fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there are going to be a number of people from what I says mainland China brought into the United States to work on American farms. There's a bit of a conflict here, I think, considering the fact that the American farmers are being driven off their land. I don't know the exact figures, but I think it would be safe to say there are hundreds leaving the farm daily, and yet we're bringing in foreigners to work on American farms. We're giving billions of dollars in foreign aid to the state of Israel and to other foreign nations, most of it primarily to Israel, and yet we can't help out America's farmers. Americans are going out of work and we're exporting our jobs overseas. These are the kind of things that hit home with people, and this is what bothers the special interests, because the American people are beginning to hurt. And when the people begin to hurt, they begin to wake up. And that's a problem for the special interests.
This is again, the September 14th issue of the Spotlight. Victories in court for lobby, and you have a story here, Mr. Piper, against Anderson and Hunt. Give us a little more context and background of the Spotlight's history with libel. And
okay, in regard to the Hunt case, I think this should probably be of interest to every listener. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that, I think it was in 1978, we published a story written by Victor Marchetti. He's a former executive assistant to the deputy director of the CIA, and he's the author of The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, fairly well-known and reputable individual. He wrote an article saying that the CIA was going to frame convicted Watergate burglar E. Howard Hunt for the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In fact, the way the article was written was more or less a defense of Hunt, suggesting that perhaps he was not guilty of involvement in the crime, but that he was going to be framed for it by the CIA. Well, much to the surprise of the Spotlight, Mr. Hunt brought a lawsuit. And through a tangled web of litigation, it ultimately ended up that through a series of 2 trials, and as I say, what can best be described in shorthand as a tangled web of litigation, we were cleared of the libel charges that Mr. Hunt brought. But I think that what is most significant about the trial is the fact that we had a deposition from Marita Lorenz, a former CIA operative who was the ex-mistress of Fidel Castro, and who Ms. Lorenz subsequently turned against Castro. She reported that the day before, I believe it was, the day before President Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, she was in a motel room with E. Howard Hunt and Lee Harvey Oswald and ultimately Jack Ruby. And of course, Jack Ruby subsequently killed Lee Oswald, for people who are not aware of that, suggesting that there may have been some connections with Mr. Hunt to principals involved in the Kennedy assassination. This was brought out during the trial, and oddly enough, there was very little publicity given to this. What makes it so remarkable is the fact that the attorney who defended us, Mark Lane, who I mentioned previously, is the author of Rush to Judgment, which was a national bestseller, critical of the Warren Commission. Mr. Lane brought these things out, and yet it was not reported. I think it's significant that a celebrity, which Mr. Hunt certainly is, a celebrity known for his involvement in Watergate and the CIA connection and so forth, was connected to the Kennedy assassination, yet it was not reported. So I think, as I say, we won that libel case. Mr. Anderson has a nasty habit of making publishing critical articles about the Spotlight, and I think it kind of reflects upon Mr. Anderson. He published a cover story in a now defunct publication which he dubbed The Investigator, and it was about Liberty Lobby and the Spotlight. And he put a very sensational cover on it with a picture. I think there was a swastika on it, the Nazi symbol and so forth. And we subsequently learned during depositions in our libel suit against Mr. Anderson that the reason he told his editor that the reason why he wanted to put a swastika on the cover was because he thought it would attract, as he put it, Jewish distributors. So in other words, it was a sleazy pitch to get his magazine circulated, exploiting the Jewish community. At any rate, Mr. Anderson has attacked the Spotlight time and again, and we have brought a libel suit against him. We're fairly confident that we're going to get him into federal court here in the District of Columbia, and he can prove to the satisfaction of a jury, if he can, and I don't think that he can prove what he has said about the Spotlight. So as I say, it'll be very interesting, and maybe C-SPAN would want to cover it. It should be very interesting.
How frequently does the Spotlight have problems with libel cases being brought against it?
We have had 2 libel suits actually brought against us. One was by William F. Buckley, Jr., the former CIA operative who dabbles in journalism on occasion. His publication, National Review, has time and again attacked the Spotlight, and we published an article about him, and he decided to sue us. It was basically, the jury disagreed with Mr. Buckley. Mr. Buckley made a fool of himself, actually. It was quite a pleasure to see Mr. Buckley linguistically restrained by a judge. He had trouble keeping his tongue tied. At any rate, we were cleared, basically, of the libel charges to such an extent that one of Mr. Buckley's supporters in the courtroom broke down and cried when the verdict came out. But Mr. Buckley's resentment towards a jury in that case was displayed in a recent article. He commented that, in his view, the jury had apparently none of the members of the jury had ever read a newspaper in their life. Well, I guess most people can't use the big words that Mr. Buckley uses, but that's of little consequence. So we've been very successful in the courts.
Manassas, Virginia, good morning.
Good morning. I would just like to thank Spotlight and Mr. Piper for all the support they gave in freeing George Hansen. I thought he was unfairly put behind bars, and I was glad to see every month or every week an article put in about him so that people were aware he was still in jail. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you. What is, how does Mr. Hansen play in the populist movement?
George Hansen is probably one of the most respected men in public life today, at least as far as people who care to know the truth are concerned. George Hansen spent, don't want to be unfair to George by underestimating the amount of time he spent in jail, but he spent about a year in jail simply because the Justice Department decided he should be in jail. He was convicted on ethics charges for having failed to file his wife's private business transactions on his financial disclosure forms. The problem with this is that before he filed with the House Ethics Committee, he had in fact informed the Ethics Committee that he was not going to include her transactions on his forms, and they cleared it. However, the Justice Department, for obviously political reasons, decided to prosecute, and George Hansen ended up in jail. That's a thumbnail sketch of an outrageous travesty. Considering the fact that there were 230 other members of Congress who had actually done similar things, or actually had done things which were perhaps even of a blatantly criminal nature. And they were allowed to get away with it. Now, you're pointing to an article, Populists Nominate Hansen. George Hansen has been nominated by the Populist Party for President of the United States. He was nominated while he was still in federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia. And I think it's a tribute to George Hansen that a political party would nominate him even while he was serving in prison, because it suggests that the people who did nominate him recognized there's a lot more to the Hansen story. And George is now seeking a presidential pardon. He sought a presidential pardon while he was in jail. And I would suggest to anybody who cares enough about justice to call the White House and urge President Reagan to pardon George Hansen. He is a president. He has been nominated for president by the Populist Party. We expect to be meeting with George Hansen, representatives of the Populist Party, to meet with George Hansen and find out if indeed he will accept the nomination. I think there are a lot of people around the country who would like to see him accept it, and if indeed he does accept it, I think he could be a real force in the 1988 election.
Logan, Utah, good morning.
Yes, I'd like to ask the gentleman, he mentioned something about the PLO needs a homeland and too much money is going into Israel. Let me ask him, in 48 and 56 and 67, the Arab countries surrounding Israel decided that they were going to drive them into the sea. Now, they lost the 48 war. They went back home, licked their wounds, and built up their army. In 56, the same thing happened. In 67, the same thing happened. Let me ask you, if they had have defeated Israel, like Israel defeated them, would they say, okay, come out of the water now, we'll give you your land back? Israel defeated them. They cannot afford to lose one war. They cannot afford to lose one war. Here they are surrounded by 100 million people, and you say, give them their land back. First of all, the PLO was driven out of Jordan. Why did the Jordan drive them out? Another thing, let me ask you. I know they're giving a lot of money towards Israel, but how many American boys have lost their life defending Israel? There was some 200 and some odd men were lost in Beirut, in Grenada even. We lost a couple boys, but I spend $1 billion.
A couple? You talk to those 200, more than 200 families who lost boys in Lebanon. I don't call that a couple, sir. Would you be willing to send your son or grandson over to fight for Israel?
Too many Americans when they were in Beirut. Why did we send?
They were sent to Beirut basically to defend the interests of Israel. And sir, you quoted me as saying that I wanted a homeland for the PLO. I said a homeland for the Palestinians. Let's make a distinction.
What's the difference?
The difference is that the Palestinians are a people. The PLO happens to be the widely recognized and legally recognized representative of the Palestinian people. The PLO, the acronym PLO, has a negative connotation that's frequently bandied about by the Israeli lobby and its adherents in this country. People are very critical of the PLO. These people who are displaced from their land, what you're saying, sir, is that because Israel had the military might to defeat the Arab countries, that therefore it's right. Might means right as far as you're concerned. Now, you make reference to the 1967 war, sir. Are you aware of the fact that on June 8th, 1967, 34 Americans were slaughtered by the State of Israel in a deliberate and unprovoked attack on the USS Liberty in the Mediterranean Sea? Were you aware of that, for which Israel paid, I think, a sum of perhaps $6 million? That was an act of war against the United States. That was something which happened in the 1967 war by our great ally, Israel. These are the kind of things that we should consider in the overall context before we make these judgments as you're making, sir.
Logan, quick response, then we'll move on.
To a country that won't even say they have the right to exist?
What are you saying, sir?
I'm saying that they have the West Bank and the Golan Heights merely to protect their borders.
Well, in other words, you're saying that they should be permitted to take any land they want simply to expand. Is that correct?
Well, what would the Arabs do if they had taken the Israel land? Would they expand it?
I don't know, sir. I'm not an Arab, and I'm not a spokesman for the Arabs. I don't know. Are you a spokesman for the Israelis?
We've defeated you now. Now you can come back. Would they have said that?
I don't know, sir.
Well, but you know definitely that we should give them their land back because we defeated...
I didn't say give them their land back, although it's interesting that you did call it their land, which in fact it was their land. That's correct.
Okay, we'll move on to Pensacola, Florida. Go ahead, please. Pensacola, you're on the air.
Hello. I am a retired disabled veteran and a Democratic voter for over 50 years. But I want to say that I am absolutely ashamed of the way that the Democrats have acted during the Bork hearings. Senator Byrd recently came out and has stated that I have recently made up my mind, when as a matter of fact, Senator Byrd, Kennedy, Biden, and Metzenbaum all had their minds made up to go against President Reagan's nominee before he ever announced who the nominee would be. It is a shame that we have to have such a disgraceful action in our country today when a man who, with the high esteem of Judge Bork and his proven character, could be politically assassinated by someone like the people that I have just mentioned.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I concur. He's got the right idea. I think that's exactly what is happening. As I say, I have my differences with Judge Bork, and the Spotlight has its differences with Judge Bork, but I'd sooner see him on the high court than Howard Metzenbaum or Ted Kennedy.
Michael Collins Piper, assistant editor of the Spotlight. At that point, we would like to take an opportunity to thank you for joining us this morning.
Okay, thank you. I enjoyed it. It's been interesting.
The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976. The Hidden Tyranny. The below article is a reproduction of a booklet containing a well-known interview that shall absolutely shock the average Christian who is unaware of this kind of information. The article contains the text of a most revealing and shocking interview of a Jew by the name of Harold Rosenthal, an influential Jew learned in the Jewish ways and involved in the workings of government in Washington, D.C., explaining the Jewish involvement and cause of the major problems we face today. Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, age 29, the administrative assistant to Senator Jacob K. Javits of New York, who was since defeated in the 1980 election, was killed, a month after giving this recorded interview, in an alleged skyjacking attempt on an Israeli airliner in Istanbul, Turkey, August 12, 1976. Did it have anything to do with his revealing sensitive Jewish programs? God knows. You should know how the Jews think of you, what they plan to do to you, and what they have already accomplished by 1976. One can but only imagine how far their plans have progressed in the intervening years. To date, Sep. 2004, I have heard of no refuting of this article recorded and transcribed in 1976, by Jewish activists, apologists, or so-called watchdog groups. What follows below is the transcript of the July 1976 interview, preceded by an introduction from Charles A. Weissman, circa June 1992. Hold on to your seats. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976. The Hidden Tyranny introduction. This booklet contains the text of a most revealing and shocking interview of a Jew by the name of Harold Rosenthal, which was conducted in 1976, by a concerned patriot, a Walter White, Jr. Mr. Rosenthal, an influential Jew learned in the Jewish ways and involved in the workings of government in Washington, D.C., explained the Jewish involvement and cause of the major problems we face today. Rosenthal, in exposing certain aspects of the inner invisible world of Jewry, revealed the modes and tactics Jews have used in destroying world civilization and covertly attaining control over our lives and governments. The result has been a hidden tyranny upon us, like the tyranny waged against the saints by the Red Beast system of revelation referred to as Mystery Babylon. As Edmund Burke stated, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But before we can properly act, we need a proper, not just a superficial understanding of the problem. This booklet will help provide the reader with that understanding. Charles A. Weissman, June 1992. From Church of True Israel website. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976 Part 1. In a highly confidential interview with a Jewish administrative assistant to one of this nation's ranking senators, he said, "It is a marvel that the American people do not rise up and drive every Jew out of this country." The Jew, Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, made this statement after admitting Jewish dominance in all significant national programs. He said, "We Jews continue to be amazed with the ease by which Christian Americans have fallen into our hands. While the naive Americans wait for Khrushchev to bury them, we have taught them to submit to our every demand." Asked how a nation could be captured without their knowing it, Mr. Rosenthal attributed this victory to absolute control of the media. He boasted of Jewish control of ADL news. Any newspaper which refused to acquiesce to controlled news was brought to its knees by withdrawing advertising. Failing in this, the Jews stopped the supply of newsprint and ink. "It's a very simple matter," he stated. Asked about men in high political office, Mr. Rosenthal said that no one in the last 3 decades has achieved any political power without Jewish approval. "Americans have not had a presidential choice since 1932. Roosevelt was our man. Every president since Roosevelt has been our man." In a discussion about George Wallace, Mr. Rosenthal smiled and suggested that we note where Wallace stands today. When the U.S. foreign policy was mentioned, the bedroom confidence of the interview was all but set aside. With disdain and mockery he sneered at the American stupidity in failing to see through the entire scope of Kissinger's foreign policy. It is Zionist communist policy from beginning to end. Yet the citizens think this Jewish policy will benefit America. He cited détente and Angola as examples of Jewish diplomacy. The credulous nature of Americans drew only contempt from him. The interview continued on an almost omniscient plane. "We Jews have put issue upon issue to the American people. Then we promote both sides of the issue as confusion reigns. With their eyes fixed on the issues, they fail to see who is behind every scene. We Jews toy with the American public as a cat toys with a mouse." As the conversation went on into the late hours, one could sense that perhaps America deserves the reign of terror being planned for her. The Jewish mind pits every ethnic group against the other. "The blood of the masses will flow as we wait for our day of world victory," Mr. Rosenthal said coldly. 4 hours after this incredible discussion, a sense of inadequacy prevailed. Is it possible that another group of human beings could be so treacherous in spirit, so evil in intent? Yet, the words heard and the evidence at hand are real. Is it possible that the American people can remain docile, even while their life's blood is being drained from them? It seems so. What does all this say to us? Since what you have just read plus the lengthy interview that followed, Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, age 29, the administrative assistant to Senator Jacob K. Javits of New York, was killed in an alleged skyjacking attempt on an Israeli airliner in Istanbul, Turkey, August 12, 1976. It would appear that Mr. Rosenthal might have talked too freely because although 4 people were killed and some 30 injured during the skyjacking attempt, Rosenthal was not killed by a random bullet as were the others. From reports secured at the time, it seems amazing and strange that of all the people involved in this incident Mr. Rosenthal should have been fatally wounded. Meanwhile, Walter White, who conducted this confidential interview, can now state after much investigation, expense and travel, that Harold Rosenthal was undoubtedly murdered at the Istanbul airport, in what was to appear as a hijacking probably by his own people. We had no desire to hurt anyone and especially members of the Rosenthal family who had suffered enough in this tragedy. We corresponded with his mother and father in Philadelphia and his brother Mark David Rosenthal, who is attending college in Northern California. In fact, it was he who advised me that Harold's friends in Washington had set up a memorial fund in Harold W. Rosenthal's name. He sent us a copy of the Harold W. Rosenthal Fellowship and International Relations American Jewish Committee, Washington Chapter, 818-18th Street Northwest Washington, D.C. 20006. It lists some of the who's who, and the honorary co-chairmen are Vice President Walter F. Mondale and Senator Jacob K. Javits. Out of respect, We decided to wait until a year had passed since the death of Harold Wallace Rosenthal, so we delayed publishing everything he gave us on the memorable day and evening. And as stated before, the interview was lengthy as he seemed to enjoy pouring out this information, and at times it was broken and went on into the evening. This writer and editor is not easily shocked, but as this egotist Harold W. Rosenthal raved on and on, I found so much of what he said actually horrifying, the actual betrayal of which he admittedly was a part, and he appeared to gloat over the apparent success of a Jewish world conspiracy. This, mind you, comes from an administrative assistant to one of our ranking senators, Jacob K. Javits of New York. What you are about to read should act as a warning to all non-Jews throughout the world. It hopefully should open the eyes of many who knew him in Washington government circles. It becomes indeed obvious that what he discloses is not fiction. It is not imagination. He was not pretending as he spoke with knowledge and intelligence. Many things have been said and written about the one-world Jewish conspiracy, but never has it been described so openly. It staggers the imagination. Their plans are shocking, and many will be astonished at the contents of this document. Nothing like it has ever been told before. We prefer not to elaborate. You be the judge. Looking back to the time of this interview and having had time to analyze Harold Rosenthal's candidness, we are compelled to think of him as a conceited, boastful yet very knowledgeable person. I would classify him as an egotist and an egoist. At times his cruelty surfaced with a venom, especially as he describes the stupid Christians, or goys as he so often referred to us. This surprised me because the word goy is not in our language, and he must have known this. His mind was thoroughly immersed in the one-world plan of world Jewry. With arrogance, he boasted that the Jews' conquest of the world was almost complete thanks to Christian stupidity. When asked if he was a Zionist, M.R. Rosenthal replied, "That's a hell of a question." At the foundation of the issue, the traditional Zionist concept of Allah, a Hebrew term meaning the ingathering or return of diaspora dispersed Jews to the Palestine homeland. Ever since 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel, Allah has become a basic imperative of Israeli government policy. What is Allah? Will you please spell it for me? He did so, and we inquired as to the realistic meaning of Allah. Mr. Rosenthal said, "It is a permanent physical migration to Palestine, not just a visit." We asked, "What is Zionism?" I've heard Jews define it as anything from permanent migration to financial spiritual support of Israel from around the world. Mr. Rosenthal replied, "Our first leader, former Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, said that Zionism without a return to Zion is phony. Not many American Jews migrate permanently to Israel. Some say that all Jews, by definition, are Zionists. Others say that a Jew is not a Zionist unless he's a member who pays dues to an actively Zionist organization. Definitions have been tossed everywhere since the Jewish homeland became a reality. Millions of tax-exempt American dollars are sent to Israel yearly, and we true American do not like this." Mr. Rosenthal replied, "The naive politicians in Washington are gullible. Most of them are not too bright, so the powerful Jewish lobbyists influenced this practice years ago, and there is no one strong enough to stop it. Some of the money is even returned to the United States and spent on Zionist propaganda efforts, much of it through the B'nai B'rith and the Conference of Jewish Organizations and the World Jewish Congress. The Jewish Agency is a funding arm, a sort of body of B'nai B'rith officials. There is nothing wrong with sending American dollars to Israel tax-free so long as we are smart enough to get away with it. Let's reverse this conversation for a minute. You made it clear and quite vociferously that you don't like Jews. Why do you hate us?" "Mr. Rosenthal, I do not hate anybody. I said I hate what the Jews are doing to us, and especially as it relates to any and everything related to Christianity. I hate their deceit, trickery, cunning, and their detestable dishonesty. Does that make me anti-Semitic? If it does, then I am anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism does not signify opposition to Semitism. There is no such thing. It is an expression we Jews use effectively as a smear word used to brand as a bigot, like you guys, anyone who brings criticism against Jews. We use it against hate-mongers. It was made clear that I despised the Jews' corruptive influence on our Christian culture and on our properly Christ-oriented American way of life, To which Mr. Rosenthal said, during Christ's time, the Jews were seeking a material and earthly kingdom, but Christ offered the Jews a spiritual kingdom. This, they couldn't buy, so they rejected Jesus Christ and had him crucified. What do you mean had him crucified? Doesn't history prove that the Jews crucified Jesus Christ? To which he answered, yes, I guess they did. I don't beat around the bush, but 2,000 years ago your people would have done the same thing to a man who mistreated them as Christ did the Jews. You speak of Jesus Christ as merely a man. That's all, he was a man who walked on the earth like any other man, and this myth about Christ rising from the dead and returning to earth to visit with his disciples is a bunch of crap. The Jews who drove the Arabs out of Palestine did so to disprove Christ's mission for a spiritual kingdom. You see, instead of a leader who would make an empire for the Jews, your kind of people gave the Jews a peaceful preacher called Christ who instead of an eye for an eye turns the other cheek. Rubbish. We are building and, in fact, have built an earthly empire without your kind and your disappointing Messiah. I can see that it is you and your kind who try to get Christ out of Christmas. I feel sorry for you, to which he quickly replied, don't give me that shit. I don't want your pity. I don't need it. Too many Jews do not have the guts to tell you how we live and plan, but I am not intimidated by anyone or anything. I know where I'm going. We asked why do Jews frequently change their names. He said, Jews are the most intelligent people in the world, so if it benefits them to change their name they do so. That's all there is to it. They mix in your society, which is plenty corrupt, so while the Jews are benefiting themselves, the dumb goy doesn't realize that these Jews with non-Jew names are Jews. I know what you are thinking about Jews in government who use non-Jew names. Well, don't be concerned, because in the foreseeable future there will be no presidential power in the United States. The invisible government is taking strength in that direction. To your knowledge, are the Jews in Russia really persecuted, or are they given any kind of freedom? To which he said, most Jews throughout the world, I'd say more than 90%, know what is really happening to our people. We have communication unequaled anywhere. It is only the jerks, the ignorant and misinformed and degenerates who can find peace in your society, and you bastards hide your sins by donning sheep's clothing. You are the hypocrites, not the Jews, as you say and write about. To answer your question, in Russia, there are two distinct governments, one visible and the other invisible. The visible is made up of different nationalities, whereas the invisible is composed of ALL Jews. The powerful Soviet secret police takes its orders from the invisible government. There are about 6 to 7 million communists in Soviet Russia, 50% are Jews and 50% are Gentiles, but the Gentiles are not trusted. The communist Jews are united and trust each other, while the others spy on one another. About every 5 to 6 years the secret Jewish board calls for the purge of the party, and many are liquidated. When asked, why? He said, because they begin to understand too much about the Jewish secret government. Russian communists have a secret group order which consists of Jews only. They rule over everything pertaining to the visible government. It was this powerful organization that was responsible for the secret removal of the center of communism to Tel Aviv, from where all instructions now originate. Does our government and the United Nations have knowledge of this? He replied, the United Nations is nothing but a trapdoor to the Red World's immense concentration camp. We pretty much control the UN. When asked why the communists destroy the middle class or educated and their entire families when they invade a country, Mr. Rosenthal replied, it is an established rule to destroy all members of pre-existing government, their families and relatives, but never Jews. They destroy all members of the police, state police, army officers and their families, but never Jews. You see, we know when a government begins the search for the communists within its borders, they are really attempting to uncover Jews in their area. We are not fooled. The invisible rulers in the communist countries have a world control over the propaganda and the governments in free countries. We control every media of expression, including newspapers, magazines, radio and television. Even your music. We censor the songs released for publication long before they reach the publishers. Before long we will have complete control of your thinking. The way you boast, if this is true, it is frightening to think about our future, and that of Christianity, To which Mr. Rosenthal said, "There will be a forced class warfare here in the United States and many will be liquidated. You will unquestionably be among them. The Jews will not be harmed. I'm not boasting. I'm giving you the facts. And it is too late for your Christian followers to put up a defense. That time is long past. Long, long ago we had to become the aggressors. That is undoubtedly one of our great purposes in life. We are aggressors. Because you stole your pretended religious beliefs from our Talmud." After reminding him that we thought he was intelligent but now realized that he doesn't know what he was talking about, he replied, "Judaism is the unequaled culture, with nothing anywhere in the world to compare with it. Your so-called Christianity is an outgrowth of Judaism. The cultural and intellectual influence of Judaism is felt throughout the entire world, yes, throughout civilization." When I asked whether he thought we faced a problem eventually with the blacks because of their startling population increase, he said that the blacks are helping to serve our purpose, which might mean several things. We discussed the black invasion of city, county and state and their prominence now in television. Also how ridiculous it is for blacks to become converted to Jews, like Sammy Davis for instance. Mr. R replied, "That doesn't mean anything. We know that a black cannot become a Jew and that Sammy Davis is still black. It may have been to his advantage to become converted. In reality he still remains a nigger and not a Jew." I told him of my in-depth study of the Jews and that there were few who have done more research on world Jewry than I, and about my unpleasant discoveries, reminding Mr. R that there is no morality among Jews. He replied, "Money is more important than morality. We can accomplish anything with money. Our people are proving that in Israel, where its strength against attack is its permanent state of war readiness. Israel can now win in any encounter. The kibbutz-raised intellectual elements are going to build that small country into a Mid-East wonderland. It will also eventually be the base for world government headquarters. Talmudic Judaism is a religion of Jewish world control and slavery." We discussed the tragedy of Watergate and corruption at all levels of government and suggested that government representatives practice more openness and candor in dealing with the people. Mr. R said, "What good would it do? What the hell does the public know about the running of government? The great majority are asses, horses' asses. May we quote you on that? I don't care what you do, as I said, if you have the guts to speak out. We would all have better understanding between each other, Jews and Gentiles, if we spoke out more openly. Your people don't have guts. We establish your thinking, we even place within you a guilt complex making you afraid to criticize Jewry openly." The Jewish belief and religion. In the quietness of this enlightening conversation it became clear that the understanding poured forth did not come from a novice. Mr. Rosenthal was asked how Jews gain acceptance so easily among other races. His answer was long and thorough. At a very early date, urged on by the desire to make our way in the world, Jews began to look for a means whereby we might distract all attention from the racial aspect. What could be more effective, and at the same time more above suspicion, than to borrow and utilize the idea of a religious community? We've been forced to borrow this idea from the Aryans. We Jews never possessed any religious institution which developed out of our own consciousness, for we lack any kind of idealism. This means that a belief in life beyond this terrestrial existence is foreign to us. As a matter of fact, the Talmud does not lay down principles with which to prepare the individual for a life to come, but furnishes only rules for a sumptuous life in this world. It is a collection of instructions for maintaining the Jewish race and regulating intercourses between us and the Goy. Our teachings are not concerned with moral problems, but rather with how to get. This explains the parasitic nature of Jewish people. Jews never get rich off one another, but seek to get the labor and wealth of others. In regard to the moral value of the Jews' religious teaching, there exist quite exhaustive studies which show the kind of religion that we have in a light that makes it look uncanny to the Aryan mind. We are the best example of the kind of product which religious training evolves. Our life is of this world only, and our mentality is as foreign to the true spirits of Christianity as our character was to the founder of this new creed 2,000 years ago. The founder of Christianity made no secret of his estimation of the Jews and the fact that he was not one of us. When he found it necessary, he drove us out of the temple of God, because then, as always, we used religion as a means of advancing our commercial interest. The merchants of Babylon have commercialized our society. But at that time, we managed to nail Jesus to the cross for his attitude towards us. Whereas, the modern Christians enter into party politics, and in order to win elections, they debase themselves by begging for Jewish votes. They even enter into political intrigues with us against the interests of their own nation. These people have been called by various names: scalawags, political prostitutes, carpetbaggers, charlatans, traitors, stooges, pawns, etc. We can live among other nations and states only as long as we succeed in persuading them that the Jews are not a distinct people, but are the representatives of a religious faith who, therefore, constitute a religious community, though this be of a peculiar character. As a matter of fact, this is the greatest of our falsehoods. The Jews have established 5 major falsehoods which work to conceal their nature and protect their status and power, to wit, the Jews are Israelites, and thus God's chosen people. Jesus Christ was a Jew, that 6 million Jews were killed in a Holocaust during WW2, that all races are equal, or that all are brothers, that the Jews are just another religious group. We are obliged to conceal our own particular character and mode of life so that we will be allowed to continue our existence as a parasite among the nations. Our success in this line has gone so far that many believe that the Jews among them are genuine Frenchmen, or Englishmen, or Italians, or Germans who just happen to belong to a religious denomination which is different from that prevailing in these countries. Especially in circles concerned with government, where the officials have only a minimum of historical sense, we are able to impose our infamous deception with comparative ease. Therefore, there is never the slightest suspicion that we Jews form a distinct nation and are not merely the adherents of a confession. Though one glance at the press which we control ought to furnish sufficient evidence to the contrary, even for those who possess only the smallest degree of intelligence. The money power. When questioned about the ways in which the Jews have gained power, Mr. Rosenthal said, "Our power has been created through the manipulation of the national monetary system." We authored the quotation. Money is power. As revealed in our master plan, it was essential for us to establish a private national bank. The Federal Reserve System fitted our plan nicely since it is owned by us, but the name implies that it is a government institution. From the very outset, our purpose was to confiscate all the gold and silver, replacing them with worthless non-redeemable paper notes. This we have done. When asked about the term non-redeemable notes, Mr. Rosenthal replied, "Prior to 1968, the gullible goy could take a $1 Federal Reserve note into any bank in America and redeem it for $1, which was by law a coin containing 412 1/2 grains of 90% silver. Up until 1933, one could have redeemed the same note for a coin of 25 4/5 grains of 90% gold. All we do is give the goy more non-redeemable notes, or else copper slugs. But we never give them the gold and silver. Only more paper," he said contemptuously. "We Jews have prospered through the paper gimmick. It's our method through which we take money and give only paper in return. The economic problem of America and the world is ultimately a Jewish problem, or as Henry Ford stated, the money question, properly solved, is the end of the Jewish question and every other question of a mundane nature." "Can you give me an example of this?" we asked. The examples are numerous, but a few readily apparent are the stocks and bonds market, all forms of insurance, and the fractional reserve system practiced by the Federal Reserve Corporation, not to mention the billions in gold and silver that we have gained in exchange for paper notes, stupidly called money. Money power was essential in carrying out our master plan of international conquest through propaganda. When asked how they proposed doing this, he said, "At first, by controlling the banking system we were able to control corporation capital. Through this, we acquired total monopoly of the movie industry, the radio networks and the newly developing television media. The printing industry, newspapers, periodicals and technical journals had already fallen into our hands. The richest plum was later to come when we took over the publication of all school materials. Through these vehicles we could mold public opinion to suit our own purposes. The people are only stupid pigs that grunt and squeal the chance we give them, whether they be truth or lies. Mind control and conditioning. When asked if the Jews felt any threat from the silent majority, he laughed at the idea, saying, "There is no such thing as the silent majority because we control their cry and hue. The only thing that exists is an unthinking majority, and unthinking they will remain, as long as their escape from a rigorous service is the opiate of our entertainment industry. By controlling industry, we have become the taskmasters and the people the slaves. When the pressure of daily toil builds to an explosive degree, we have provided the safety valve of momentary pleasure. The television and movie industries furnish the necessary temporary distraction. These programs are carefully designed to appeal to the sensuous emotions, never to the logical thinking mind. Because of this, the people are programmed to respond according to our dictates, not according to reason. Silent they never are. Thinking they will remain." Continuing his thought of Jewish control over the Goyim, Mr. Rosenthal said, "We have castrated society through fear and intimidation. Its manhood exists only in combination with a feminine outward appearance. Being so neutered, the populace has become docile and easily ruled. As all geldings in nature, their thoughts are not involved with the concerns of the future and their posterity, but only with the present toil and the next meal." Manipulation of labor and industry. It was obvious that the excitement of Mr. Rosenthal was triggered when mention was made of the nation's industry. We have been successful in dividing society against itself by pitting labor against management. The social labor movement, employing labor unions, a manipulation of wages and prices, and government regulation of business, was the brainchild of Jews such as Karl Marx and Samuel Gompers. The result was a destruction of free enterprise. This perhaps has been one of our greatest feats, since in reality it is a triangle, though only 2 points ever seem to occur. In modern industry, where exists capital, which force we represent, is the apex. Both management and labor are on the base of this triangle. They continually stand opposed to each other and their attention is never directed to the head of their problem. Management is forced to raise prices since we are ever increasing the cost of capital. Labor must have increasing wages and management must have higher prices, thus creating a vicious cycle. We are never called to task for our role, which is the real reason for inflation, since the conflict between management and labor is so severe that neither has time to observe our activities. It is our increase in the cost of capital that causes the inflation cycle. We do not labor or manage, and yet we receive the profits. Through our money manipulation, the capital that we supply industry costs us nothing. Through our national bank, the Federal Reserve, we extend book credit, which we create from nothing, to all local banks who are member banks. They in turn extend book credit to industry. Thus, we do more than God, for all of our wealth is created from nothing. You look shocked. Don't be. It's true, we actually do more than God. With this supposed capital we bring industry, management and labor into our debt, which debt only increases and is never liquidated. Through this continual increase, we are able to pit management against labor so they will never unite and attack us and usher in a debt-free industrial utopia. We are the necessary element since we expend nothing. Management can create its own capital, the profits. Its business would grow and profits increase. Labor would prosper as well, while the price of the product would remain constant. The prosperity of industry, labor and management would continually increase. We Jews glory in the fact that the stupid Goyim have never realized that we are the parasites consuming an increasing portion of production while the producers are continually receiving less and less. The control over religion. As the hours rolled on in this intense, but cordial, interview, M.R. Rosenthal exposed his thoughts concerning religion. Religion, too, must be taught, and through this necessity we have labored. As the Jew Karl Marx stated, religion is the opiate of the people. With our control of the textbook industry and the news media, we have been able to hold ourselves up as the authorities on religion. Many of our rabbis now hold professorships in supposed Christian theological seminaries. We are amazed by the Christians' stupidity in receiving our teachings and propagating them as their own. This is one of the main reasons for the power and the control Jews have attained over white nations, the adopting of Jewish ways. As Henry Ford stated, the Christian cannot read his Bible except through Jewish spectacles, and, therefore, reads it wrong. The International Juvole. IV, pages 238. As a result, Christians don't have God's word on a certain matter, they have the Jews' word. Judaism is not only the teaching of the synagogue, but also the doctrine of every Christian church in America. Through our propaganda, the church has become our most avid supporter. This has even given us a special place in society. They're believing the lie that we are the chosen people and they, Gentiles. These deluded children of the church defend us to the point of destroying their own culture. Jews need not have their finger on every button that causes a destruction or a Judaization of Christian civilization, as in many cases they have their proselytes or Gentile fronts to do it for them. This truth is evident even to the dullard when one views history and sees that all wars have been white fighting white in order that we maintain our control. We controlled England during the Revolutionary War, the North during the Civil War, and England and America during World War I and II. Through our influence of religion we were able to involve the ignorant white Christians in war against themselves, which always impoverished both sides while we reaped a financial and political harvest. Anytime truth comes forth which exposes us, we simply rally our forces, the ignorant Christians. They attack the Crusaders even if they are members of their own families. Anyone who has been in the forefront exposing the truth of the Jewish issue can attest to this fact stated by Mr. Rosenthal. Through religion we have gained complete control of society, government and economics. No law is ever passed except its merits have previously been taught from the pulpits. An example of this is race equality, which led to integration and ultimately to mongrelization. The gullible clergy in one breath instruct their parishioners that we are a special, chosen people, while in another breath proclaim all races are the same. Their inconsistency is never discovered. So we Jews enjoy a special place in society while all other races are reduced to racial equality. It is for this reason that we authored the equality hoax, thereby reducing all to a lower level. We have been taught that our current economic practices are benevolent, therefore Christian. These pulpit parrots extol our goodness for loaning them the money to build their temples, never realizing that their own holy book condemns all usury. They are eager to pay our exorbitant interest rates. They have led society into our control through the same practice. Politically, they hail the blessings of democracy and never understand that through democracy we have gained control of their nation. Their book. Notice that Mr. Rosenthal always refers to the Bible as their book, the white people, never as our book or the Jews' book. Again teaches a benevolent despotic form of government in accordance with the laws of the book, while a democracy is mob rule which we control through their churches, our news media and economic institutions. Their religion is only another channel through which we can direct the power of our propaganda. These religious puppets' stupidity is only exceeded by their cowardice, for they are ruled easily. The light dawns. Rarely does any man confess the intimacy of his soul as did Mr. Rosenthal. Hindsight suggests that there was a greater force compelling this man to reveal what has been written here. The remainder of the interview seems to confirm this. Since we do not believe in a life after death, all our efforts are directed to the now. We are not as foolish as you and will never adopt an ideology that is rooted in self-sacrifice. Whereas you will live and die for the benefit of the community, we will live and die only for our own individual self. The idea of self-sacrifice is abhorred by Jews. It is abhorrent to me. No cause is worth dying lot since death is the end. The only time we unite is to preserve our individual selves. As a group of wolves unite to attack a prey, but then disperse after each is filled, so we Jews unite when peril is pending, not to preserve our community but to save our own skin. This attitude permeates our entire being and philosophy. We are not the creators, for to create would only benefit another. The white race has clearly been the creators in terms of inventions, achievements, etc., and by them all the families or races of the world have been blessed or have benefited from them, as prophesied in Genesis 12:3, 28-14. This proves Jews are not God's chosen people. We are the acquirers and are interested only in satisfying the self. To understand our philosophy, understand the term to get. We never give but only take. We never labor but enjoy the fruits of others' labor. We do not create but confiscate. We are not the producers but the parasites. We can physically live within any society, but always remain spiritually apart. To work would be to produce, and the highest form of that labor would be to create. Your race has always worked for the satisfaction of what it produces. We would never work for anyone's benefit, only for what we can get. We have used this Aryan attitude to achieve our greatest prosperity. You will work for the enjoyment you derive out of producing, while never being concerned about the pay. We take your productivity for a paltry fee and turn it into fortunes. Until recently, the pride of workmanship exceeded the quest for high incomes. However, we have been able to enslave society to our own power, which is money, by causing them to seek after it. We have converted the people to our philosophy of getting and acquiring so that they will never be satisfied. A dissatisfied people are the pawns in our game of world conquest. Thus, they are always seeking and never able to find satisfaction. The very moment they seek happiness outside themselves, they become our willing servants. Your people never realize that we offer them only worthless baubles that cannot bring fulfillment. They procure one and consume it and are not filled. They procure one and consume it and are not filled. We present another. We have an infinite number of outward distractions, to the extent that life cannot again turn inward to find its definite fulfillment. You have become addicted to our medicine, through which we have become your absolute masters. On the first and fundamental lie, the purpose of which is to make people believe that we are not a nation but a religion, other lies are subsequently based. Our greatest fear is that this falsehood will be discovered, for we will be stamped out the moment the general public comes into possession of the truth and acts upon it. It is one thing to put a man in possession of the truth, to get him to understand it is another, and to get him to act upon it is another still. Truth by itself has no value unless used or applied in some way. It is becoming apparent that an awakening is occurring even here in America. We had hoped that through our devastation of Christian Germany that any subject dealing with us would be a fearful taboo. However, there seems to be a resurgence here in the one nation that we so strongly control. We are presently making plans for a rapid exodus. We know that when the light begins to dawn, there will be no stopping it. All efforts on our part will only intensify that light and draw focus upon it. We fear that light is coming forth in movements across this land, especially yours. It has amazed us how you have been successful in reaching the people after we closed every door of communication. This, we fear, is a sign of a coming pogrom that will take place in America soon. The American public has realized that we are in control, which is a fatal mistake on our part. This nation could never be the land of the free as long as it is the land of the Jew. This is a concept most patriots cannot understand. Patriots have spent untold man-hours fighting the IRS, the Federal Reserve, the media, Congress or government in general. These things are merely tools which the Jew now uses against the detestable Goyim. The problem is not the tool or device, but the heathen in control of it. This is the revelation that will be our undoing. The American people have been easily ruled through our propaganda that the pen is mightier than the sword. We virtually get away with murder, and all the Goy do is to talk about it, which is ineffective since we, the masters of propaganda, always publish a contradicting account. If the Aryan would review history and apply those lessons of the past, then the pen will be thrown down in disgust and the sword wielded in the heat of passion. A recurrence to history would edify our minds and show us that the European countries solved their Jewish problem only by use of force. Thus far, we have escaped the sword, when the only reprisal is some periodical of no repute, or some pamphlet with limited circulation. Their pen is no match for ours, but our constant fear is that they may open their eyes and learn that no change was ever brought about with a pen. History has been written in blood, not with ink. No letter, editorial or book has ever rallied the people or stopped tyranny. We understand this principle and are continually propagandizing the people to write letters to the President, to Congress and to their local media. We are safe to continually exploit, intimidate and disenfranchise the white American as long as they are preoccupied with the illusion of educating the masses through printed material. Woe be unto us if they ever see the futility of it, lay down the pen and employ the sword. History confirms the fact that the passions of an aroused minority, no matter how small a group, have exerted enough power to topple the greatest empire. The movements that control destiny are not those that rest on the inactive majority, but on the sheer force of an active minority. Will is power, not numbers, for a strong will always rule the masses. In examining the extent of Jewish power and control over America, Henry Ford stated this control can be explained only by the Jewish will to power. The International Jew 1920, Vol. I, pages 210. Again, we are safe as long as our will is stronger, or the will of the people is misdirected, scattered and without leadership. We will never be deposed with words, only force. Would this not be the logical and proper course of action required to rid the land of any type of invader or hostile enemy? The wisdom of Mr. Harold Rosenthal has been set forth truthfully and accurately. The question now to you is, what can you do to protect the nation and every citizen from the above potentials? Those of us who have been in this battle to save our once great nation for so many years possibly become calloused, not too sensitive to the horrible things going on around us. I must admit, however, that the facts as conveyed by Harold Wallace Rosenthal have made their impact on this writer. The interview, or perhaps a better word might be confession, has helped to bring to the surface a reality of what we veterans have known for years, but the stark reality of Jewish treachery becomes more shocking when getting it all in one package. Mr. Rosenthal, a former influential Jew in his own right, prided himself in being a vital part of the admitted control of the media, and of their invisible government in which no political power is exercised without Jewish approval. Let us also highlight the other key remarks of Mr. Rosenthal, that the American people have no guts and the Jews sneer at their stupidity. The Jews power through their money, and the money power afford them a master plan for international conquest through propaganda. There is in America an unthinking majority. The Jews' treachery of pitting labor against management, the Jewish belief that Christ was just another man on the earth, that Jews are admitted parasites who have gained control of our society, government and economies through their religion, the myth of the Jews being the chosen people, the confessed big lie that the Jews are a religion and not a nation, that the Jews fear being discovered for what they are. We are beginning to uncover the whole conspiracy on the part of the communists and world Zionism to capture control of our nation, and the Jews and their prostituted media are beginning to admit, as Mr. Rosenthal said, that we have them on the run. Believe us, dear reader, it will be a shock to the Jewish world when this gets into circulation and they discover we have our hands on this first-hand information from a Jew who was formerly respected in high government office, and it is this report that could trip the miracle. If, with your help, we can get this material distributed in the hands of citizens and even in government offices throughout the country, it might help bring about the desired action. As you have observed, the Jew conspiracy is to reduce our population to a subservient obedience designed to groom us for a Jew-controlled, international, money-changing dictatorship designed by Jewish Zionists and communists. This is occurring and will continue if the American public allows itself to be so subdued. The ignorance and apathy of the people have been an open invitation to the Jew to ensnare them in their socialist plans. These one-world subverters who have been running our bureaucracy in Washington have permitted over 12 million aliens to come into this country illegally from all the nations of the world, including China and Mexico and all nations in between. They are holding jobs which amount to more than the number of people we have unemployed. This manuscript can act as a weapon with which we will open the eyes of the masses. They know something is wrong, but they do not know what to do. Now we can show them. Only by knowing the truth of the problems can a proper course of action be made. Thus the importance of circulating this evidence to tens of thousands is necessary so victory could be within our grasp. Although it is a lengthy manuscript, its contents will hold the attention of almost any reader. Why? Because it affects every man, woman and child in America. Yes, even throughout the world. It is that important. There cannot ever be another document of such vital importance. This has to do with life and death truth. The revelations in this document are shocking and unbelievable to the innocent who can scarcely imagine such self-confessed evil ambitions. Mr. Rosenthal appeared to take great pride in being able to disclose some of their inner, untold secrets, all of which unfolds as we listen to every word spoken mine and his during the lengthy interview Walter White's interview with Harold Rosenthal, which is recorded on cassette tapes as our documentation. The Jewish nation is the enemy of ALL nations. They have already become hysterical since this document was brought to their attention. God save us. And that appeal to God is not an idle gesture. My Christian faith remains intact. God save our nation, even if at present we are prisoners of a propaganda monopoly by a handful of subverters and manipulators. We can, with His help, lift the yoke and break the bonds so that our majority by righteous representation can assert itself in following the freedom under our United States Constitution. Warning: there is a risk involved in printing this manuscript. This writer was struck down on March 13, 1978 and badly beaten. But I risked my life before, and I shall gladly do it again if only to get this knowledge into the hands of a few million people. At the time of my interview with Mr. Rosenthal, I knew it was powerfully potent, and I had an overwhelming confidence in its content to arouse and awaken many who formerly disbelieved. It is interesting how the Rosenthal document confirms the theme of the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. It might be called Personalized Protocols, 1979 edition. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976 Part 2. Most Jews do not like to admit it, but our God is Lucifer. The above is an exact quote of Harold Wallace Rosenthal, former top administrative aide to the then Senator Jacob Javits, who was since defeated in the 1980 election. I, Walter White, Jr., for the past 17 years director and editor of the monthly conservative publication Western Front, was told about Mr. Rosenthal's boastings around Washington, D.C., and I was encouraged to meet with him and to interview him for a fee. Mr. Rosenthal had stated publicly that the Jews will completely dominate throughout the entire world, and that they control every facet of political life in America and every aspect of the communication media. Mr. R's emphasis. Eventually Mr. Rosenthal and L were brought together, at which time I interviewed him privately and taped said interview with Mr. Rosenthal's knowledge and consent. During the lengthy meeting Mr. Rosenthal became impatient, rude and vulgar, all of which is recorded on the tape, and he sought the balance of his fee before I had concluded my questioning. Since the entire interview was so lengthy, in 1977 we released and published only the first portion under the same title as above, The Hidden Tyranny. Copies of this manuscript Part I have been sought by people from all around the globe. We now release the balance of the taped interview as Part 2. Although I do not wish to digress, an Eastern analyst has told me that the Hidden Tyranny manuscript Part I has had a pass-on readership of 3.5%. Thus, if true, the manuscript Part I has been read by more than 7 million people. When this final portion Part 2 begins circulating, its impact may be even greater. It depends upon you, the reader. Before any agreement was reached between us, I had established with Mr. Rosenthal that he would answer an unlimited number of questions with complete honesty and to the best of his ability. It was because of this understanding that I took issue with Mr. Rosenthal during the final stages of the interview and accused him of not being honest with me as it related to his response to my question, "Do you have knowledge of when and why the story began about the Jews being God's chosen people?" That is when he said in part, "Most Jews do not like to admit it, but our God is Lucifer, so I wasn't lying, and we are His chosen people." Lucifer is very much alive. As this goes to press, we still seek a governmental body to investigate Harold Rosenthal's allegations. My dictionary conveys such allegations as treason. We now pick up after a dispute during which the tape recorder has been turned off. Obviously where the W appears, those are my words. Where the R appears, that indicates comment. W. Mr. Rosenthal, when true history is permitted to be published at large, when the truth actually surfaces, what do you expect the people of the world will do to you Jews? R. I thought we had concluded this interview. W. I'm concerned, and this question seems to require your answer. R. We were all finished White, and now you start to pump me again. I've already given you the tables of stone and yet you want more. R. Never mind, you wouldn't understand anyway, you Christians. W. So now you damn me because I'm a Christian. I thought we had tried to keep this on a business-like basis, did we not? R. Mumbled exclamation by Rosenthal. W. Whatever that is, or means, you're using words I've never heard before. Are you speaking English? R. I said. W. Will you spell it? R. Rosenthal spells M-I-S-C-H-N-A-H and briefly says it is from the basics of the Talmud. Mr. R continues, let's not dwell on this. We're not getting anywhere, besides we had concluded things and that ends our agreement. W. Are you afraid to answer the question I posed? R. Who the hell do you think I am? I'm not afraid to answer any question, but I've given you enough information for a book. W. Did I not pay you as per our agreement? R. Yeah, sure, but again you're wanting more. Alright, you want my opinion as to what the people of the world are going to think when history is written. W. Well, I didn't pose the question exactly like that, but go ahead. R. I don't give a damn what the people will think. Besides, whenever that happens you and I will be dead. Plain dead. Does that satisfy you? W. There are 2 or 3 questions among my notes here, Mr. Rosenthal, which have yet to be answered, and one is quite important. R. What is that? W. The story about the 6 million Jews supposedly cremated or murdered by the Nazis. R. What about it? W. Do you know who or what Jewish organization created that big lie? R. No, I don't know anything about its authenticity. I don't think it's too important anyway. W. Mr. Rosenthal, you know better than that. What about the younger generation who is growing up believing this big lie? And you say it's not important. R. It was an outgrowth of the war, and we all know that Hitler hated the Jews, so someone, somewhere, thought of exaggerating the number. We know that many Jews were killed by the Nazis. W. I'm sure you know that when World War II broke out there were less than 250,000 Jews in ADL of Germany. Many thousands had already left Germany. Or so what? As I said before, the Jewish people are the cleverest people in the world. So somebody thought up a big number, and perhaps it grew until now the number of Jews killed is 6 million. We have control of the news media, and that is the great difference. Otherwise your people could tell your big lie. W. Go you brush it off that lightly. Something of such enormity. Mr. R. interrupted here, saying, my people have been taught to give consideration and attention to our teachers rather than to the words of your people and laws. W. You're living in America, Mr. Rosenthal, it is our duty to uphold the laws of our country. Your religion teaches you that you may take an oath, such as when being inducted into political office, and if the oath displeases you, you can deny silently the fact you have taken that oath. Now I have copies of the Jewish document, called the Kol Nidre, and I have proven their authenticity. The Kol Nidre, all vows, is found in the Talmud book Nedarim Vows, and is recited each year in the synagogue on the Day of Atonement. It allows all future obligations, oaths or pledges a Jew may engage in to be deemed absolved, forgiven, annulled, and void, and made of no effect. This allows Jews to lie, subvert, cheat, etc. R. Well, all Jews don't practice that oath business, I'm sure. W. But they do practice it, do they not, with the rabbi's approval? R. To some extent. Perhaps when it is helpful to the individual. W. Is that not sinful? Or maybe to your way of thinking. I've told you, you and I are different. We are different people. Our beliefs are entirely different. We have been raised that way for many centuries, so it is not a sin for us to take any oath and break it. It's our teaching. This point on the difference of character has been made by many other Jewish writers and statesmen, and is well supported in history and science. Yet, ironically, Christians continue to believe the Jewish lie that we are all the same or equal. W. I've possibly saved the most important question of all until now. R. Listen, White, if you're going on any further, my time is money. We made an agreement and you're extending it beyond reason. You have it all on tapes, and remember that we agreed for you to take whatever you want from the tapes and your notes, but no reproduction of the tapes under any circumstances. They are to be destroyed. If you violate this white, we'll cut your balls off. W. Who are WE? R. Just get smart and you'll find out. You don't want any trouble and I don't either. You keep our agreement and no one gets hurt. Now give me the rest of my money. Okay? W. I intend to keep our agreement to the letter and you have my word of honor that these tapes will not go any further than my use in the preparation of the story. There is no misunderstanding. We agree on that and I'll keep my word. You'll get your money in a minute. Or I have friends white, I know a lot of people and I don't want them to be reading things attributed to me that I didn't say. I don't give a damn what you or anybody else thinks, but I don't want lies printed, only the questions and answers of this interview. W. We understand each other perfectly in that regard, Mr. Rosenthal. Now, please, this question. Or shoot. But remember I need Las Vegas money. W. Surely you must know somewhere in your schooling, or you have some kind of personal feeling or understanding as to when and why the story began that the Jews are God's chosen people or we are God's chosen people. W. Do you really believe that, Mr. Rosenthal? Or maybe I can explain, or perhaps Jake could give you a better answer. W. Who is Jake? Or Jake Javits, you know, my associate. He's the man that I work for and he's a pretty smart guy. Plenty smart. His answer might serve your purpose for the story better. W. I want your answer. R. You and we actually have a different God. W. Is that the answer to the Jews being God's chosen people? R. To our God we are chosen ones. We are taught that from our childhood. W. That is an evasive answer. You know what I mean when I pose such a question and I don't believe your reply or your explanation. R. Okay. I don't give a damn what you believe. W. Do your people believe that Jesus Christ was a Jew? Or hell. We're not going back to that again, are we? We've already gone over that. W. That was before the tape machine was ever turned on. I don't think we recorded your reply to this question. R. Well, I can answer for all Jews. I guess you're asking what Jews throughout the world believe? W. Yes. R. Jake could answer that better than I. W. Please, I don't want Senator Javits' answer to anything. I want your answer. R. White, I know what you're searching for. I've known from the beginning, but that's alright. You and we are so apart. You're another breed. You're not our kind. It's not secret that we do not respect you, and of your kind. Genesis 3:15. W. Are you referring to just our kind as Christians? R. No, you Gentiles, all of you are our enemies. When I was a little boy, just a kid, very young, we were taught very wisely. Many centuries ago, when the Jews were persecuted in almost every country and driven out of so many countries, some of the governments, I cannot remember exactly whether it was the government of France or Spain. Anyway, the government demanded that the Jews must become Christians or be expelled from the country. W. Yes, I recall reading of this many times. Or was it France or Spain? W. Possibly both, but I vividly remember the story of Queen Isabella of Spain, how patient she was with the Jews, always giving them the benefit of doubt, until such time as her eyes were opened completely to the deceptions of the Jews. But please go on. Or anyway, the Jews at that time had a very wise rabbi leader, a world leader, and his advice was respected throughout the world. He said that the Jews must pretend to become Christians and bide their time and make real sacrifices if necessary. We have always been ready to sacrifice a few thousand Jews in exchange for world leadership. This was the plan of the Jews who instigated WW. Second, some Jews were sacrificed so that the persecution propaganda could continue. It is a small price and there is nothing wrong with that. I was taught that we Jews must become lawyers so we could control and strangle the courts, and even the judges, unless they were Jews. We should become doctors and teachers and leaders in all the churches, and this goal has almost been fully accomplished. I said it before and I'll say it now, that we will have complete, I say complete control, throughout the entire world possibly before I die. We are very successful in keeping you Gentiles confused, We create confusion. The word Babylon in Hebrew is Babel and means confusion. The Jews are masters at confusion because they are the ringleaders of the system known as Mystery Babylon. You're not stupid, White. You know that the Jews are successful because of our unity. We die for one another if necessary. We generously finance our own, so it is understandable how we govern not only in this country. We direct American foreign affairs. We are the super government of the world. Is that enough? Go on. I find what you are saying most interesting. Please go on. We are the most powerful international body of people in the world. Do you believe that? You speak with such confidence that I... Mr. R interrupted, we can destroy any country's economy without their even being aware of it, if we want to. I think this is what you want to hear. Most Americans are totally unaware that by the Federal Reserve System their money has been stolen and the economy devolved. I am expecting you to be truthful with me, Mr. Rosenthal R. Well, it's true. We're smart, we are powerful, and at the proper time we will mix up your Gentile women with the blacks, and in 50 years you'll be all mixed up. Niggers love to your white women, and we encourage it by using them to our advantage. I recall you're saying that the blacks serve a purpose. Yes, we will use them to a great advantage. It was primarily by Jewish merchant ships and Jewish-run slave auctions that the blacks got to America. And try to destroy them after you have used them, I presume? If necessary. Yes. You and I know they're inferior people, a dumb race, but can be useful with the use of money. I mean real big money. Niggers will do anything for money. So, when the time comes, and you might even live to see it, we will have that complete control while you stupid Christians are waiting for your Christ, the impostor, to return as your savior. You sound bitter. Not at all. Why should I be bitter? We are on top. And when this whole sordid story becomes known, the result will be an aroused citizenry, an angry citizenry who will want to destroy you. How? I ask you how? You can reach the people. We have it all under such control that no one or nobody can people unless it is done through our media control. Who has in control of the mass media in the 20th century? Chairman of ABCPP Leonard Goldenson, President of CBS, James H. Rosenfield, Chairman of RCS, David Sarnoff, Chief Executive of NBC, Fred Silverman, President of PBS, Lawrence Grossman, Chairman of Time, Arthur Heiskell, Editor of U.S. News and World Report, Marvin Stone, Chief Executive of Dow Jones, Warren H. Phillips, Editor of Newsweek, Lester Bernstein, President of TV Guide, Walter Annenberg, President of New York Times, Salzberger family, TV program producer, Norman Lear, these and more all are Jews. We have it sewed up. We have infected your churches completely, and we now control the school system in the United States. It is a reality that we have complete control of organized Christianity. Almost anywhere, completely. I find so many things you say to be repulsive. The way you say things. It's what you wanted to hear, or you wouldn't have paid good money for this interview. So long as you are truthful with me, but you still haven't answered that question I posed long back. Do you believe that Jesus Christ was a Jew? As I said, Jake could give you a really intelligent answer. I know that most of our friends, kids and people I grew up with, in fact all of our friends, I'd say all of them, don't believe Jesus was a Jew. He was an impostor, and millions of people all over the world now believe that Christianity was founded on untruth and deliberate incorrect translations of your Bible. Christ Jesus was a fraud. Even the National Council of Churches agree that there were false translations of the book your people respect. It's built on lies. This comment can hardly be regarded as coming from a true Christian source, since the National Council of Churches was organized by Jews and its theology is controlled by them. According to the latest scholarly research, Your ancestors are not Israelites but Mongolians and Asiatics from Eastern Europe and Western Asia, so your ancestors were thousands of miles from the Holy Land. They never, ever saw the Holy Land, proving that your people were not the chosen people of God. So what? What difference does it make? W. We have been taught the big lie for many years that Jews are God's chosen people, so it does make a difference. A very grave difference. R. What grave difference? W. Does it not prove that the great majority of Jews today are Khazar in origin? Your ancestors never trod the lands where Christ walked. They never knew Jerusalem and Palestine, so how could? Mr. R interrupted R. Shouting, what the hell difference does it make now? W. I find so many things that you have said as being repulsive in your arrogant manner in boasting, as it were, to admittedly being a part of this gigantic, this heinous plot against mankind, and at times, you attempt to brush things off by saying, what difference does it make? So much of what you have admitted staggers me, in fact, I lack the words. Mr. R interrupts here. R. That's because you're a Gentile. You don't understand. You never will. Until it's too late, and my hope, personally, is that the American people do not. Mr. R paused here. W. There is so much of what you have said, that as an individual, people may not believe you, they may not believe this interview. Mr. R interrupts. R. That is why we have the control today. One of the reasons. Your people did not believe that it was possible for any people or race to accomplish what we have within a couple of 100 years. The Gentile is stupid. We are intelligent. I am going to be a very important person in and around Washington, and soon. I intend to become nationally prominent. You are going to hear and read about me in the future. I'm young and have had the guts to tell you more than any other Jew would ever dare to tell you, at least publicly. I've stuck my neck out white. Some of what I have told you is part of the inner, invisible world of Jewry. Looking at you now as I denote your change, I see you as a despicable bastard, all of you. Mr. R interrupts. R. No one calls me a bastard and gets away with it. W. You are all contemptible, base and detestable, R. I'll knock your goddamn head off if you call me a bastard. I wouldn't try it if I were you. I too have friends, many of them would like a chance to get to you, so let's keep this on a formal basis as it was intended at the beginning. Mr. R. then said something which I asked him to spell. He spelled Oyvay, oy vey, and added oy vey is mir, and when asked what it meant he said I would not understand, but I am including it here because it is on the tape. W. Many times when referring to a person being a Jew, I have heard it said, well, I understand he is a Presbyterian or a Catholic. So, I would like your opinion or explanation. How do Jews feel about another Jew who becomes a Christian Scientist or converts to any other religion? Is he or she no longer a Jew? R. That can best be answered, well, let me put it this way. I don't know what your mother and father were, what nationality I mean. W. My father was British, English, and my mother was German. R. Well, if you decided to study Zionism or the Talmud or actually wanted to become converted and attend the synagogue, would that erase your English or German heritage? West, of course not, but I wanted to hear it from a learned Jew. What you have said then is that he or she is always a Jew. R. It's stupid, stupid. We are what we are. No matter what we join or adopt, it doesn't change what we are. I am a Jew and nothing can change me because I take up another religion. Such stupidity. This concept is verified in Scripture by the rhetorical question, can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? And in the parable of the tares and the wheat we find that the tares, the children of the wicked, are utterly destroyed. None are saved from the destroying fire, none are converted into wheat. God is not going to change the tares into something they never were. W. But the Jews are a great part of this deceit. R. We have a talent for confusing your issues. W. You are masters of deceit, and this cunning practice of yours has allowed your people to infiltrate the governments throughout the world. R. Why not? Why shouldn't we take over the banks, the universities, the church and the government if the Gentiles are not intelligent enough to run them? I could not have talked this way a few years ago, but now it is different. There is nothing to undo our strategy in the world today, so I can speak much more freely. What I have disclosed may help other Jews to speak out if they have any guts. We are not a pusillanimous race. W. You're very sure of yourself and your people, aren't you? R. We may be divided in many things, but nothing ever actually separates us. W. Who is W.E.? R. My people, the Jews, are as one when it counts most. No incident can ever divide us. Down throughout the centuries, Jews have learned they cannot trust other people. Thus, the Jewish racial bond is their greatest bond. I have heard Jews fight each other with venom. That's entirely different. Sure, we will fight one another, but as I say, when it counts most, we're as one. Our forte white is division and duplicity. It is an infallible weapon and we are skillful, perhaps perfectionists in its application. You don't have the intelligence to compete. W. But we have a culture that you Jews will never understand or equal. Our Jews have a family life. Our culture requires a high standard in education. We establish standards so that our kids exceed that of their parents. Our people continue to show a dramatic educational advancement. Our kids' success doesn't depend entirely on schools but on the family, and we are damn proud of these accomplishments. You can't compete. More than 12,000 doctors are graduated from medical schools in the United States every year, and almost 10,000 of them are Jews. Among the law students, the Jewish percentage is even higher. Jews are on such a solid foundation here in the United States that any kind of opposition to our control would only be temporary. You know, we laugh about the 6 million story, just like the story that Christ was a Jew and the God's chosen people story. This should show people that we have a solidarity like none other in the world. Jews have a closeness to other Jews whom they have never seen or perhaps even heard of. As it is said, blood is thicker than water. Mr. Rosenthal, I hope you haven't lied to me in any of this interview, because if you did we could retaliate on you. Understand? R. What I have told you is true, all of it. I don't need to lie. I have found the Jews' passion is greed, profit and the destruction of Christianity. Am I correct? Or I cannot speak for all Jews. W. I'm speaking of the great majority of Jews. Am I right? Or maybe most Jews feel that way, but there's nothing wrong with that. I think you just go on and on because there is a bitterness within you, and perhaps you say things that even you do not believe. Some of the things you say are almost unbelievable. R. Well, I don't give a good goddamn what you believe. I've given you honest answers and opinions. Now no more questions. And don't forget our agreement. If I learn that the tapes are used other than what we agreed upon, you will suffer serious consequences. Do you understand? I understand. And now, Mr. Rosenthal, here is the balance of the money agreed upon for this interview. Finis, dear reader, after the tape machine had been turned off, I accused Harold Rosenthal of not living up to our agreement in replying truthfully to my question as to the Jews being God's chosen people. He replied, "We are God's chosen people. Most Jews do not like to admit it, but our God is Lucifer, so I wasn't lying, and we are his chosen people." Lucifer is very much alive. I was stunned. I had no further comment. I had watched this arrogant, boastful person change at times like a chameleon that changes its color. Many times he showed a hatred, yes, even a venom. At the conclusion I felt unclean being around him. The hidden tyranny has been revealed. Much of what Harold Wallace Rosenthal said brought to the surface a reality we veterans have known all along, but this Jewish treachery is more shocking when getting it all in one package. It has been alleged that Harold Rosenthal was killed because he talked too much, so it is understandable, if true, inasmuch as he made such shocking statements almost 7 years ago that we now see as a reality. As an example, we cite the staggering exploitation of the Negro and the black presence everywhere today. We minimize Mr. R's boastings of the control of our churches. unbelievable then. Now, in the fall of 1983, it is a reality that the Supreme Court sanctions IRS-approved state churches. When Rosenthal made such statements about church control, we felt that he was bragging, but the present-day persecution of the church and its ministries here in America by the government is today a fact. If you were told that a sheriff and 3 deputies would wait in the darkness of midnight to arrest a pastor, one Everett Sullivan, in Omaha, Nebraska, because he intended to resume the daily educational ministry in Faith Baptist Church in Louisville, you would not have believed it 6 years ago. Today, however, it is just another bizarre episode in one of the most incredible stories in American history. Organized juries determined in the final oppression of Christianity via taxation and regulation is now a fact. The enemy is not coming. The enemy is here. War has been declared on Christianity, churches, religious freedoms, the true American way, and the white race. Are other freedoms worth standing for? Living for? Fighting for? Dying for? If so, let's stand up and be seen and speak up and be heard. The time to fight for freedom is while we still have the freedom to do so. Christians are to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Salt and light are dominion qualities. It is time for Christians to exercise godly dominion, and if by the instrument of governmental authority a people is being driven to its destruction, then rebellion is not only the right but the duty of every member of that people. The hot blood which stood us at Concord still flows in our veins. We need true Americans for the defense of America against Jewish tyranny, and there are millions of freedom-loving, red-blooded Americans out there waiting to be told. So let us ally ourselves together in the refusal to permit those alien devils from ruining our once great nation. When the American people really discover and realize what the unspeakable Jew has perpetrated, their wrath will know no bounds, and the gutters will run deep with blood. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976. The Hidden Tyranny. The below article is a reproduction of a booklet containing a well-known interview that shall absolutely shock the average Christian who is unaware of this kind of information. The article contains the text of a most revealing and shocking interview of a Jew by the name of Harold Rosenthal, an influential Jew learned in the Jewish ways and involved in the workings of government in Washington, D.C., explaining the Jewish involvement and cause of the major problems we face today. Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, age 29, the administrative assistant to Senator Jacob K. Javits of New York, who was since defeated in the 1980 election, was killed, a month after giving this recorded interview, in an alleged skyjacking attempt on an Israeli airliner in Istanbul, Turkey, August 12, 1976. Did it have anything to do with his revealing sensitive Jewish programs? God knows. You should know how the Jews think of you, what they plan to do to you, and what they have already accomplished by 1976. One can but only imagine how far their plans have progressed in the intervening years. To date, Sep. 2004, I have heard of no refuting of this article recorded and transcribed in 1976, by Jewish activists, apologists, or so-called watchdog groups. What follows below is the transcript of the July 1976 interview, preceded by an introduction from Charles A. Weissman, circa June 1992. Hold on to your seats. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview 1976. The Hidden Tyranny. Introduction. This booklet contains the text of a most revealing and shocking interview of a Jew by the name of Harold Rosenthal, which was conducted in 1976, by a concerned patriot, a Walter White, Jr. Mr. Rosenthal, an influential Jew learned in the Jewish ways and involved in the workings of government in Washington, D.C., explained the Jewish involvement and cause of the major problems we face today. Rosenthal, in exposing certain aspects of the inner invisible world of Jewry, revealed the modes and tactics Jews have used in destroying world civilization and covertly attaining control over our lives and governments. The result has been a hidden tyranny upon us, like the tyranny waged against the saints by the Red Beast system of revelation referred to as Mystery Babylon. As Edmund Burke stated, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But before we can properly act, we need a proper, not just a superficial understanding of the problem. This booklet will help provide the reader with that understanding. Charles A. Weissman, June 1992, from Church of True Israel website. The Harold Wallace Rosenthal interview, 1976, Part 1. In a highly confidential interview with a Jewish administrative assistant to one of this nation's ranking senators, he said, "It is a marvel that the American people do not rise up and drive every Jew out of this country." The Jew, Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, made this statement after admitting Jewish dominance in all significant national programs. He said, "We Jews continue to be amazed with the ease by which Christian Americans have fallen into our hands. While the naive Americans wait for Khrushchev to bury them, we have taught them to submit to our every demand." Asked how a nation could be captured without their knowing it, Mr. Rosenthal attributed this victory to absolute control of the media. He boasted of Jewish control of ADL news. Any newspaper which refused to acquiesce to controlled news was brought to its knees by withdrawing advertising. Failing in this, the Jews stopped the supply of newsprint and ink. "It's a very simple matter," he stated. Asked about men in high political office, Mr. Rosenthal said that no one in the last 3 decades has achieved any political power without Jewish approval. Americans have not had a presidential choice since 1932. Roosevelt was our man. Every president since Roosevelt has been our man. In a discussion about George Wallace, Mr. Rosenthal smiled and suggested that we note where Wallace stands today. When the U.S. foreign policy was mentioned, the bedroom confidence of the interview was all but set aside. With disdain and mockery he sneered at the American stupidity in failing to see through the entire scope of Kissinger's foreign policy. It is Zionist communist policy from beginning to end. Yet the citizens think this Jewish policy will benefit America. He cited détente and Angola as examples of Jewish diplomacy. The credulous nature of Americans drew only contempt from him. The interview continued on an almost omniscient plane. "We Jews have put issue upon issue to the American people. Then we promote both sides of the issue as confusion reigns. With their eyes fixed on the issues, they fail to see who is behind every scene. We Jews toy with the American public as a cat toys with a mouse." As the conversation went on into the late hours, one could sense that perhaps America deserves the reign of terror being planned for her. The Jewish mind pits every ethnic group against the other. "The blood of the masses will flow as we wait for our day of world victory," Mr. Rosenthal said coldly. For hours after this incredible discussion, a sense of inadequacy prevailed. Is it possible that another group of human beings could be so treacherous in spirit, so evil in intent? Yet, the words heard and the evidence at hand are real. Is it possible that the American people can remain docile, even while their life's blood is being drained from them? It seems so. What does all this say to us? Since what you have just read plus the lengthy interview that followed, Mr. Harold Wallace Rosenthal, age 29, the administrative assistant to Senator Jacob K. Javits of New York, was killed in an alleged skyjacking attempt on an Israeli airliner in Istanbul, Turkey, August 12, 1976. It would appear that Mr. Rosenthal might have talked too freely, because although 4 people were killed and some 30 injured during the skyjacking attempt, Rosenthal was not killed by a random bullet as were the others. From reports secured at the time, it seems amazing and strange that of all the people involved in this incident, Mr. Rosenthal should have been fatally wounded. Meanwhile, Walter White, who conducted this confidential interview, can now state after much investigation, expense and travel, that Harold Rosenthal was undoubtedly murdered at the Istanbul airport, in what was to appear as a hijacking, probably by his own people. We had no desire to hurt anyone, and especially members of the Rosenthal family who had suffered enough in this tragedy. We corresponded with his mother and father in Philadelphia and his brother Mark David Rosenthal, who is attending college in Northern California. In fact, it was he who advised me that Harold's friends in Washington had set up a memorial fund in Harold W. Rosenthal's name. He sent us a copy of the Harold W. Rosenthal Fellowship and International Relations American Jewish Committee, Washington Chapter, 818-18th Street, Northwest Washington, D.C. 20006. It lists some of the who's who, and the honorary co-chairmen are Vice President Walter F. Mondale and Senator Jacob K. Javits. Out of respect, we decided to wait until a year had passed since the death of Harold Wallace Rosenthal, so we delayed publishing everything he gave us on the memorable day and evening. And as stated before, the interview was lengthy as he seemed to enjoy pouring out this information, and at times it was broken and went on into the evening. This writer and editor is not easily shocked, but as this egotist Harold W. Rosenthal raved on and on, I found so much of what he said actually horrifying, the actual betrayal of which he admittedly was a part, and he appeared to gloat over the apparent success of a Jewish world conspiracy. This, mind you, comes from an administrative assistant to one of our ranking senators, Jacob K. Javits of New York. What you are about to read should act as a warning to all non-Jews throughout the world. It hopefully should open the eyes of many who knew him in Washington government circles. It becomes indeed obvious that what he discloses is not fiction. It is not imagination. He was not pretending as he spoke with knowledge and intelligence. Many things have been said and written about the one-world Jewish conspiracy, but never has it been described so openly. It staggers the imagination. Their plans are shocking, and many will be astonished at the contents of this document. Nothing like it has ever been told before. We prefer not to elaborate. You be the judge. Looking back to the time of this interview and having had time to analyze Harold Rosenthal's candidness, we are compelled to think of him as a conceited, boastful yet very knowledgeable person. I would classify him as an egotist and an egoist. At times his cruelty surfaced with a venom, especially as he describes the stupid Christians, or goys as he so often referred to us. This surprised me because the word goy is not in our language, and he must have known this. His mind was thoroughly immersed in the one-world plan of world Jewry. With arrogance, he boasted that the Jews' conquest of the world was almost complete thanks to Christian stupidity. When asked if he was a Zionist, M.R. Rosenthal replied, "That's a hell of a question." At the foundation of the issue, the traditional Zionist concept of Allah, a Hebrew term meaning the ingathering or return of diaspora dispersed Jews to the Palestine homeland. Ever since 1948 and the creation of the State of Israel, Allah has become a basic imperative of Israeli government policy. What is Allah? Will you please spell it for me? He did so, and we inquired as to the realistic meaning of Allah. Mr. Rosenthal said, "It is a permanent physical migration to Palestine, not just a visit." We asked, "What is Zionism?" I've heard Jews define it as anything from permanent migration to financial spiritual support of Israel from around the world. Mr. Rosenthal replied, "Our first leader, former Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, said that Zionism without a return to Zion is phony. Not many American Jews migrate permanently to Israel. Some say that all Jews, by definition, are Zionists. Others say that a Jew is not a Zionist unless he's a member who pays dues to an actively Zionist organization. Definitions have been tossed everywhere since the Jewish homeland became a reality. Millions of tax-exempt American dollars are sent to Israel yearly, and we true American do not like this." Mr. Rosenthal replied, "The naive politicians in Washington are gullible. Most of them are not too bright, so the powerful Jewish lobbyists influenced this practice years ago, and there is no one strong enough to stop it. Some of the money is even returned to the United States and spent on Zionist propaganda efforts, much of it through the B'nai B'rith and the Conference of Jewish Organizations and the World Jewish Congress. The Jewish Agency is a funding arm, a sort of body of B'nai B'rith officials. There is nothing wrong with sending American dollars to Israel tax-free so long as we are smart enough to get away with it. Let's reverse this conversation for a minute. You made it clear and quite vociferously that you don't like Jews. Why do you hate us?" "Mr. Rosenthal, I do not hate anybody. I said I hate what the Jews are doing to us, and especially as it relates to any and everything related to Christianity. I hate their deceit, trickery, cunning, and their detestable dishonesty. Does that make me anti-Semitic? If it does, then I am anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism does not signify opposition to Semitism. There is no such thing. It is an expression we Jews use effectively as a smear word used to brand as a bigot, like you guys, anyone who brings criticism against Jews. we use it against hate-mongers. It was made clear that I despised the Jews' corruptive influence on our Christian culture and on our properly Christ-oriented American way of life, to which Mr. Rosenthal said, during Christ's time,